I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I ask who you're recording for?
I record every meeting.
Are you a citizen recording, or you're recording for a newspaper?
For the Board of Ed, I record.
I want to welcome everyone tonight, but
It's up on the
before we get
website by noon
started,
tomorrow.
I do want to make one announcement. There was a key found in the parking lot. It looks like a house key on a little ring chain. If anybody is missing their key, please come fetch it. First item on our agenda is the presentation of facility utilization and the racial balance options. Some of you have attended Board of Ed meetings on this issue before, but for others this is the first time. So I want to make sure that everyone has the same basic information, so I'm going to provide a little bit of background. First of all, there have been no decisions made and no plans approved. And tonight there will also be no decision made. This is a discussion of options. The board is in the middle of a process that started with gathering information and identifying options. And all of that work is going to happen before we make a decision. The board's begun public forums on these issues and meetings with the community to discuss the available information with the community, and will continue to meet with the community through this whole process. Your comments and questions are informing our process, and we appreciate your input. The board's timing is that we hope to be able to reach a decision in October. But now let me get to why we're doing this and what we are doing. The board identified the need to address 3 different objectives back in September. I'm going to talk about each one individually. First, our enrollment. The board has tracked enrollment changes and the resulting impacts on our building utilizations for the past several years. This year's enrollment report, which was delivered at our October work session, provided projections that confirmed that at least one school was currently overcrowded, and it showed that several schools would continue to have enrollment increases over the next 5 years, which would put those schools significantly over capacity. Additionally, there were other schools that were significantly under capacity, and their trends increased their position. The board wanted a more sophisticated modeling technique on the enrollment, as well as an evaluation of our facility capacities, and so we brought in an outside consultant to do this work. Malone and McBroom started their work in February, and their report on the conditions were delivered at our May 23rd meeting. The board and the public identified questions about that data, and we're going to continue to discuss that information tonight. That is part of tonight's board agenda. The issues of enrollment and capacity utilization and school overcrowding needs to be addressed in some way for the start of the 2014-15 school year. There have been 2 issues raised as part of the enrollment discussions. First is residency, and the second is our housing stock. First, the continuing statements that there are a significant number of students who are not Greenwich residents that are registered in our schools that continues to be made. The Board of Education does have residency verification procedures for every new student enrolled in the schools, all kindergarten students, all new enrollees in other grades, as well as another check when you're entering 9th grade. The Board of Ed also utilizes a change of address notification system and has created a lease database. We also follow up on MV-TIP identified about a potential situation, and in those follow-ups what we find is there is usually not a large number of students that are identified. However, even giving that background, the board is considering a one-time residency verification for K through 5. However, we have to understand the resources required to implement that and the impact on other school initiatives. Our residency verification process requires more documentation than the beach card process, and so it does have an impact on families to provide that information, as well as our staff to review it and vet it. As I said, the board is going to consider this. We need to get information on timing and costs, and then we can determine whether that's a good use of our time and resources. Now, the second objective that we need to address is racial balance. Greenwich has been cited by the state for being out of compliance with the state statute every year since 1997. The statute has been on the Connecticut books a long time before that. The statute only discusses racial composition, not student achievement, not resources. If any one school is 25 percentage points greater than the average for the district, then that school is deemed out of balance, and the district is deemed out of compliance. The law stipulates the district must present a plan to address the imbalance, and that plan must be approved by the State Board of Education. In the past 14 years, Greenwich has developed 2 different plans to address our lack of compliance. First time we created a magnet school at Hamilton Avenue, giving parents choice to attend that school regardless of their attendance zone. The neighborhood attendance area for the magnet was not changed and transportation was not provided. The second time we were cited and asked for a revised plan, we created a magnet school at New Lebanon with a similar approach. These approaches initially positively impact the racial balance in those schools, but recent housing and demographic trends have reversed whatever gains we made, and they are now higher out of balance. New Lebanon is 67% minority, Hamilton Avenue is 62%, and the district average is 33%. Greenwich has been asked by the state, we received this letter last June, to create a new plan and present it to the State Board of Education at a meeting prior to their approval of that plan. The plan needs to show that it will result in achieving compliance within a reasonable period of time. However, that doesn't have to be in the first year of implementation. Several other communities were also cited to being out of compliance: Groton, Fairfield, West Hartford, and all have completed and have approved plans to address the situation. There are 2 important questions that have been discussed by our board previously and have been recently raised by the community in your comments. First, it's the constitutionality of the law, especially given the Supreme Court decisions on the Seattle case. And the second is, what are the repercussions for not complying? In our previous discussions, our board did not believe it was a good use of town resources to challenge the law. It's not a clear legal opinion that the state law does violate Seattle, and it would require significant town resources to challenge it. However, our board will relook at these issues, and we are setting up meetings with council to discuss both of those issues regarding the law. The State Board of Ed has cited another district for stalling in previous years. However, as far as we know, they have not levied punishments against any specific district. Again, this is an issue that the board will get information to better understand. So the third objective we want to accomplish in all of this is to improve academic achievement. Greenwich has an achievement gap. Our Black, Hispanic, English language learners, special education, and free and reduced lunch students perform significantly below that of white and Asian students. As options are developed, the Board of Ed wants those options to be crafted to have a positive impact on academic achievement. So tonight the board will be hearing more information from the consultant on the enrollment projection model. Our goal ultimately is to have confidence in the data, so we're basing decisions on projections with which we agree. Tonight the consultant will also present 4 possible approaches that can be considered to address our issues. These options will be discussed to understand what they are, how they would impact our community, and how they would impact what we're trying to accomplish. I expect the outcome for this meeting for the board to be asking for more information about some of the models that are presented, potentially identify other models that we want to explore. But again, there have been no decisions made so far, and there will be no decisions made tonight. This is a part of a process, and we really appreciate as you follow the process. We're also having a public hearing tonight, as you know. In a public hearing, anyone can address the board with comments or questions. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We will be noting your questions and comments. However, it's a public hearing. It isn't an interactive session. We won't be able to respond to the speakers. At the public forums we've been having, we do try to respond as best we can, and we will continue to do that in a public forum venue. So tonight, The questions will be recorded, and we will address them as we publish an FAQ by category of types of questions. Looking forward, there are going to be 3 public forums on the information that are presented tonight. On Tuesday, June 11th at 6:30, the forum will be presented. It's targeted to the Hamilton Avenue and New Lebanon communities. There will be a Spanish translation. And at 7:30 following it, for the whole community at Western Middle School. On Friday, June 14th, from 11 to 1, there will be a forum, and we didn't write down that location, at Town Hall Meeting Room. And then on Wednesday, June 19th at 7 o'clock in the Eastern Middle School. Again, at that hearing, at those public forums, we'll review this information in a very highlighted fashion and then allow you to speak and comment and ask questions of us. Our next board meeting is Thursday, June 20th, 2 weeks from tonight, and we will continue to make progress on this issue, looking towards trying to reach a decision in October. With that, we'll move to our agenda item, and Dr. McCursey, do you want to introduce it?
Thank you, Leslie. Let me just make 5 very specific points before we move to have Enrollment begin their presentation. First off, this is a very full room, and I'm actually, as superintendent, excited to see you all here. For these critical, pivotal issues, we need the attention, we need the scrutiny. This is public education, it's fundamentally a democratic public process. We need this involvement. So first off, thank you. Second, we all know, almost everyone at this table is a parent of a student in the district or about to be in the district. My child will be a kindergartner starting in a few months. So this is about us. It's not about us versus them. This is about us and our children. This is the most complex emotional issue in education. If you look at the history of education, nothing has vexed it more than the decisions on where children go to school. It's the most emotional issue there's been in education. It's given rise most recently to charter school movements. It gave rise to the whole Catholic school sector going back in time. It's given rise to major civil rights debates. So this issue of where my child goes to school is the most fundamental aspect of education. So this kind of attention is very important. Third, many may come out tonight thinking this was the night for the decision. Many have come out tonight maybe thinking this was the night that the proposal would be before the board. Many have come out tonight thinking there was one option already determined. I've been saying repeatedly that we are looking at multiple options to bring as administration to the board. Tonight, that should be abundantly clear to you as you listen to Malone and McBroom and look at the materials. Tonight, you will see 4 very complex options. Not a plan, not a proposal. Big bold letters, Malone and McBroom say that. That's at our request. In many ways, this is the energy kick into a conversation that's been going on in the district now, at least since I started here. It's now about what are those options, how do we understand them, how do we begin that much richer, that much broader, that much deeper a public discussion about this very difficult decision about where our children are in school in Greenwich. There's an analysis of conditions. Malone and McBroom will provide some update on that shortly. And then they will dig into, with you, this broad set of conceptual options that they are putting before the community to begin discussion and debate about. 2 last points. Our administrative team in my direction has been reaching out very actively to meet with all the principals, meet with as many teachers as possible, and will continue to meet with parents. A teacher said to me a week ago, it's new for me to have the superintendent come talk about a complex problem. Principals have said, thank you for coming to talk to us about this. It should only be understood that in an effective district, they're our front line. They're front lines with your kids. They have to understand the full set of discussions here. There is no option under discussion. It's a set of options. We want our principals and teachers to understand them. Lastly, and I'll do my level best on this, this will be an emotional discussion. We have emotional discussions in our schools. We ask our students to operate at a certain level of dignity and respect in that. It's going to be tough. There'll be tough feelings. But we have to keep coming back to this is about all of us. Almost everyone in this room is a parent or related in some way directly to these schools. It's an us situation. So let me turn now to Malone and McBroom. Bring them forward. While they're coming to the mic, let me repeat for the newcomers, and it's wonderful to have you here as new participants in this. Malone and McBroom was selected through a competitive RFP process. All the information on that RFP process is on our dedicated website, both the RFP that was used to select Malone and McBroom, as well as the competing proposals. You should know, and this will be emphasized to you midway through the presentation, that in the last 2 years alone, Malone and McBroom have worked with 10 other districts in Connecticut on very similar issues. Let me repeat for you, and this is my final comment on Malone and McBroom, the importance of them to our process at this point is, one, their willingness to listen to questions, modify and make changes in the analysis as it's empirically sensible. Second, about 5 weeks ago, and this is a very important one, 5 weeks ago I was sitting with the two top deputies of the Commissioner of Education on this very, very issue. We had with us Rebecca Auger, who's here tonight. Rebecca's presence in that conversation and the initial data on the conditions in Greenwich that we could put before the state commissioner's deputies convinced them that they had to advocate with the commissioner of the state board that implementation in Greenwich could be no earlier than fall 2014. If you've been tracking this issue, the implementation date had been fall 2013. Meaning this coming September. Already, Malone and McBroom have proved their value to us by helping the state see that rushing to a solution in Greenwich would be a huge mistake. So now I bring you Malone.
Thank you, Superintendent. We're going to start off with, I know you already mentioned it, but I know there was some question on some of our background. We have worked for many communities. In just the past 2 years alone, we've worked for communities as small as 3,000 students to as large as 21,000, from long-range planning, doing enrollment projections, understanding different demographic trends. Right now is a very difficult time for schools. Some communities in Connecticut are experiencing massive declines, while others are experiencing increases in enrollment and pushing the budgets and also utilization to the limits. Right now, when you begin looking at, since the economic downturn, things have clearly changed, and as we start working our way through this data, we'll be able to see that. What you're seeing on the screen now is just a sample of some of the different communities and some of the different problems that we've worked on, anywhere from redistricting to long-range planning, all in an effort to best follow their educational objectives and to achieve enrollment balancing plans. The first part of our presentation is going to be focused on enrollment projections primarily. On the May 23rd meeting, we went through an exhaustive existing conditions analysis in which we presented a lot of census data, a lot of enrollment data, birth data, that all led to district-wide and school-specific enrollment projections at the elementary, middle, and high school level. The board had some questions and concerns regarding some of our methodology and the assumptions that we made, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to open up all that information and have a very thorough discussion with the board and also the community on just exactly how we arrived at those enrollment projections. In essence, enrollment projections are just that. They are not predictions. What they rely on is a large amount of very accurate data. You need to have reliable data. Projections, in their basic sense, are really just a planning tool. They change from year to year. You need to be able to adjust and recognize when things happen. Like we're seeing in Greenwich, like we've seen in many other communities, that there has been anomalies over the last 3 years of data, and we're going to point those out to you. These trends and these anomalies are used to develop persistency ratios, which we then are able to ascertain over a number of years how many students would be in a given building per grade level, which is very important when you're looking at facility utilization and planning. All of our enrollment projections follow the state standards. They're all predicated on October 1st enrollment. So if we start seeing some numbers that were shown tonight and they're slightly different than who's in the building right now, it's because you need a set point in time for every year, and that is set by the state as October 1st to use as your jumping off point for your enrollment projections. And last on this slide is that enrollment projections should be reviewed annually. You should be able to understand them and understand what changes have occurred in your community. The board, Brown Public Schools, the administration, they know what's going on best. What we did throughout this whole process was provide them with all the detailed data. We are essentially just a tool in this planning process, and we hear from them to rely on the deep local knowledge to help us ferret out some of the data that we're working our way through. Our projections are based on the cohort survival methodology. This is the standard methodology for enrollment projection. It is the only reliable method to produce grade level data out a number of years. This is the one that's accepted by the State Department of Education for all construction grant projects. So if you're going forth with a major building initiative that's going to require funding from the state in millions of dollars, they require it to follow this format. This cohort survival methodology relies on observed data from the recent past. What that is the only way to predict what's going to happen by projecting forward is to look at what has happened most recently. When we begin getting into the information, you'll see that the trends over the last few years are much different than they were 5 or 10 years ago. And that's really important for the community, for the board, for the administration to sink their teeth into it and understand. The way the housing markets were, the way the sales were, the economy, all of the drivers in that, all impact. They all have a major impact on enrollment in the community. So what is happening now is much different than what was happening 5 or 10 years ago. The methodology works well when things are very stable. So what we try to do is be able to identify a point in time where it seems like all the trends are beginning to align and use that point in time to predict the projections going forward. But one thing that we should note, and it's not just in Greenwich, it's everywhere, is that the recent instability in the economic climate has made it a very difficult time to project enrollments. We're going to have a lot of discussion tonight on persistency ratios. And what these are from grade level growth or loss. And grade level just doesn't mean students from 1st to 2nd grade. One of the most important ones is being able to determine the number of kindergartners that are coming into the system. And that relies on birth data, where we develop a ratio of birth to K. These ratios really account for everything that is not seen, really. It's all those external factors. It's housing turnover. It's residential development that may have occurred. It's parents opting out of the school system. It's maybe student mobility, student transfers. It's all of those things are accounted for in these persistency ratios. That's how you're able to take a known, which is either your birth data or children that are in the system, be able to accurately project and progress those students forward in order to have accurate data that goes out a number of years. In essence, a persistency ratio of 1, it means that that's 100%. So if you have, for instance, 100 first graders, a persistency ratio of 1, you would have 100 second graders. The example I have, if you have a persistency ratio of 1.05, it means that that individual cohort has increased by 5% for the following year. Changes in population, housing stock, and tenure all impact this model. When we begin to look at census data, we begin to look at sales, we begin to look at any sort of planned developments, building permits, that helps us inform which of these persistency ratios to pick and which ones not to pick in order to project forward. The basic building blocks are your enrollment data. That's where you really begin. These are students in the system. What we asked for on day 1 when we started this project was an exhaustive list of information. And the first part was the enrollment data. We were able to obtain for 5 years student enrollment by grade that we were able to address match, place on the map to be able to understand where the population densities were and how population has changed over that 5-year period. The next key piece of information is the birth data from the Connecticut Department of Public Health. What we do is we obtain address level data for every year for a 10-year period. It's not just taking the total number of births that have occurred in the community and taking our best guess or using an estimate how many of those can be assigned to an area. We address match into parcels in town, so in essence at each neighborhood we have the number of students and also the number of births that have occurred for a number of years. And last but not least, these are the historic enrollment trends. These are the trends at which we base the second key piece, which is our persistency ratios off of. This is the matriculation at each of the individual grade levels in one of the neighborhood schools to understand the dynamics that are occurring. And last but not least, we use the other empirical data, the census, the housing, and also the economic data to inform which model to pick. When we begin the process, you always want to look for tight groupings where you have a lot of data that close to clusters. Well, that wasn't the case here. So it required a lot of correlation analysis. Right off the bat, we were understanding that there was different things happening at each of the neighborhood schools. Some had very stable persistency ratios, stable births over a number of years, and those were fairly easy to project. Others weren't so easy, so that's why we had a lot of questions not only internally with our project team, but along with the Greenwich Public School staff. We were able to discuss this and get some ideas of maybe what could be behind the data and what is happening. When you begin looking at accuracy, It's always, the greatest accuracy is always at your district level. This is the largest number of students, these are the largest grade cohorts. We're able to project over the longest period of time and have the most accuracy. They aren't as affected by small changes. And when I say small changes, when you have a smaller number of grade cohorts, especially at one of the smaller neighborhood schools, when something may happen where numerous families may move out, some may move in, and it changes the grade, it changes the number of students at each grade level, that definitely impacts our enrollment projections. For example, if you have a loss of one student in a class of 50, that is a 2% change, or a loss of 2% of the total students. So you begin to understand how these little individual variables come into play. And also there's local random variations. And when you begin looking at the schools, there's a lot of differences amongst the different neighborhood schools of students entering kindergarten at different ages. And there didn't really seem to be much patterning to that. What I want to point out on this slide, it's highlighted in red. And when I begin to say that there's been a lot of changes that have been occurring, the left-hand column is really, it's all the birth decay for the entire district. So what this takes is the universe of births that has occurred in Greenwich and looks at how many students showed up as kindergartners 5 years later. If you focus on the top half of that chart, you can see it was very stable 5 to 10 years ago, where you were returning in the low 90% of all students, from all births returning 90% of the students. Well, when you begin looking at the last 3 years, in particular in 2010 and 11, was the first time that you've had an increase over 1, where based on the number of births, you've had immigration. So you've had more kindergarten students show up than you had births recorded 5 years earlier. The following year was a slight dip. Well, looking at this past year, there was an increase of a little over 16% for that birth decay. So what that tells us is something is definitely going on in the community. We were able to work our way through that data and identify those increases at several of the elementary schools. In particular, we saw in Costa Cobb, North Miamis, Glenville, Old Greenwich, and Julian Curtis to some degree. So it wasn't across the board that this additional students were showing up, or this immigration, but it was really focused on those schools, and those were some of the drivers in our enrollment projections that made us stop and begin to look at our methodology and try to get a better understanding of what was going on. These persistency ratios are really our drivers from grade to grade. What we do is we use the different averages, model after those averages along with number of births and the students that are enrolled to take a look at what the impact is, and then begin looking at some of the empirical data just to see what matches up. Persistency ratios implicitly include the net effects of transiency, dropouts, deaths, non-promotion retentions, and transfers between public and private schools. Like I said, the birth decay in 2012 and 13, as we discussed, it's really significantly greater trend that we've seen in the recent past. And the question that we have is, looking at it for the first time was, is this really an anomaly or a new trend going forward? And how do we really model for that?
Okay, so I'm going to take you through the models that we did run. And basically, the most important thing to take away is that because, as Mike explained, the larger the numbers you have, the more reliable your data, the more reliable your projections. We normalize all of our models to our district-wide projections. So you cannot look at one school under one model and then try to pair it with another school under a different model. They have to be normalized together. What we do is, before normalization, we try to make adjustments by picking different persistency ratio averages. And you can see here the 6 different models that we ran. I'm going to take you through each one, so I'm not going to belabor it on this slide. The first one is this blend where we took 3-year averages for the individual school persistency ratios, except in a few cases, which were Cascade, North Miamis, and Parkway. Those were 3 schools that had just unusually high birth decay ratios for the 12-13 year only. So we were trying to temper those anomalies, what we felt were anomalies, and use the 5-year average ratios for those schools only. Again, all of the schools then are normalized to our district-wide projections together. When we do the normalization process, we pay attention to how much variation there is between our sort of raw projection, using just the 3-year and 5-year persistency ratios, to our district-wide projection, and we found that there was a great variation between our kindergarten class size. We were uncomfortable with this model because we were basically correcting it. We were correcting it to a great degree through normalization, much more than we would normally see. The second model we ran, again, we used 3-year average persistency ratios for all schools except for COSCOB, where the birth decay ratio in 2012-13 really was extremely high compared to the recent past. This did bring the COSCOB projection down, and it redistributed the remainder, so it didn't really have a significant impact on other schools, but it is unusual to be making these kinds of adjustments for just one school, so we were a little uncomfortable moving forward with this projection. We also looked at not using the individual school's birth decay and persistency ratio, and just using what would be called a shared model, where we take the school's share of kindergartners to the town-wide births 5 years previously. And when you use this kind of methodology, you're not taking into consideration the variation at different schools, as Mike was pointing out, where we know that there are increasing births in certain neighborhoods and decreasing births in others. You sort of just flatten that out by taking the town birth to ratio. And because of that, you can see how, I should have mentioned first off that between the 2 gray dotted bars are the 5-year projections. To the right of the second gray bar are the 10-year projections. You can see from 5 to 10 years out, our projections all flatline. It's very unnatural looking. That's because you are basically working only with the town birth decay students at that point. So it's a very unnatural projection. The next model is the 3-year weighted average, where we take the last 3 years of persistency ratios at each school, and we've weighted it for the most recent year, which obviously emphasizes some of those anomalous birth decay ratios that we've talked about already. And you can see the impact of that right away, where COSCOB and North Miami are projected to grow extremely, Riverside and Parkway to decrease significantly. We felt there's just too much emphasis on a year where we saw a lot of unusual data in using this methodology. We also looked at using the 5-year average to take a longer horizon of ratios and apply those. As you can see, it sort of smooths the projections across all the schools. The problem we saw with this was that the Glenville renovation impacted that time span. So I believe Glenville opened it again in 2009. Those persistency ratios at Glenville in those first couple of years on which that 5-year average would be based are affected by that renovation process, and it also would affect the persistency ratios at other schools because there were likely transfers and the like. So this is not, we felt this was not representative of the system as it operates today. Finally, the last model is using the 3-year average persistency ratios at the individual schools. This was our chosen model. This is the most frequently used model for projecting enrollments. There was a much tighter correlation between our raw projections and our district-wide projections. The normalization wasn't playing with the numbers quite as much. The other thing to note is that all of our trend lines here are in line with the projections that you received in October from your administration. Some of the numbers might be off different, but the trends are all the same. And basically, the difference between the way your administration made projections and the way we did it here, we had the live birth data. We didn't have to make assumptions on the kindergarten class size. We actually just used live birth data to project the kindergarten size.
We're going to just touch on some of the different by grade level enrollment projections. We're not going to go through each and every one. If the board has questions on those, we could address those. I just want to walk you through a few of them just so you can get a little understanding of it. First one is Glenville, and when we took a look at Glenville, with the understanding of the renovation project that occurred there, you can begin seeing how that greatly impacts the trends when you can see that going back to 08 and 09, you're looking at your birth decay was extremely low. That would prevent us from looking at a longer window for a birth decay. We began looking at the 3-year average, 4-year average, and 3-year weighted. Well, when you take a look at what happened most recently, in 2012 and 13, you saw the district-wide number had jumped. Glenville was one of those individual schools that saw in-migration during that time frame. Take a look at the top table. There were 76 births that were recorded within the Glenville school attendance zone in 2007. 5 years later, that essentially becomes your kindergarten class of 86 as enumerated in the October 1st enrollment. That's how we're able to establish this birth decay ratio of 1.13. What we did was we recognized that with the construction project that the numbers early on were not representative of what's really happening there. And also it doesn't really align with what the housing and economic trends have been over the last 3 years. So we selected the 3-year window and the 3-year average and used that along with the known birth data that we have. These are births that are recorded by the Department of Health, and we use those to develop our incoming kindergarten class sizes over the next few years. What that gave us was fairly tight correlation of all the different models. So we're looking at Glenville. We have low standard deviations on those. We have a high level of confidence in this projection. We have a really good understanding of what the factors are and what is going on, even though it did have that bump over the last year. I know Riverside was one of the areas of concern that we had discussed, and I took a look at the district's projections that were passed out on October 4th, and we are projecting over the course of 5 years a decline to about 350 students. I believe their projections, following a different methodology, had a decline of about 400 students. What we're seeing in the numbers, you begin looking back a few years, we have these very large class sizes, 96, 78, 84. These begin matriculating through the system. Well, over the last 2 years, you're starting to see the leading edge of a decline, starting in 11 and 12, where your incoming kindergarten class was 75 students, matriculating through as first grade this year at 72. Your incoming kindergarten class for this year was 64 students, and those correlated with low 50s births. When you began looking back a few years, you had high birth year of 73 and all 64 and some high 50s numbers. Look to the right of the screen. These are the reported births by address. We're looking at an oscillation of birth cycle where 44 births in 2008, 35 in 2009, 40 and 34 again. We begin delving into the persistency ratios. We had one really high year in 2010, 2011. Began looking at why that occurred. It was pretty clear to us once we received some data from Greenwich Public Schools, and that was a year where you had numerous kindergartners who entered as 6-year-olds, so that had that dramatic increase in the K. Typically when you see that, you would have a drop in the K to 1, but we didn't see that, but that's what we would attribute that to. You look at the overall persistency ratios back a few years to 2006 to 2008, they were fairly steady in that time frame. This past year, they had their lowest amount of immigration into the system, where the number was 1.14. It was one of the lower numbers, except for 2006, as far as students moving in. These were really the driving forces. We picked a 3-year average, and when you begin comparing the different averages we have, that was allowed for the largest return. When you look at our projections, this had a high standard deviation when you take into account the town-wide birth model. But as Rebecca mentioned, the town-wide birth model doesn't take into account, all it takes into account is really Riverside's share of kindergartners that come from the entire universe of births that occurred 5 years ago. It doesn't look at the local variations that are going on in each of those neighborhood schools. it's almost blind to the birth records that have occurred there, those 44s, those 35s that we're seeing, those known births that are then correlated to our kindergarten students. But when you look at each of the neighborhood level projections, the one that we had as our chosen model aligned tightly with the others. Cost Cobb was another one. When we began looking at Cost Cobb, there was a lot of stability. You look at birth records, 4 years in a row, almost the same number, 63, 62. But the return, the kindergartners that showed up 5 years later was much different. We're looking at 94 kindergarten students showed up this past school year. You know, if you had looked at it the year before and saw that the birth number was going to be similar, it would be reasonable to assume that we would have between 60 and 70 kindergarten students showed up. But that was one of those bubbles that contributed to the larger persistency ratio for the town as a whole. Looking forward, a lot of stability in the birth data there. Our numbers correlated fairly well with the school's projection numbers going out 5 years. I believe it was within about 24 students over that 5-year horizon. What happened with this large persistency ratio was it drove the numbers up, which essentially drove the projections up, showing a greater growth trend there that gets eventually normalized by the district-wide projections. But you know, the question we have, and we don't have all the data for it yet until we start getting some of the more concrete preliminary enrollments, is that large persistency ratio, is it a trend? Is it going to occur for a second year in a row? And only time will tell. We don't see enrollment projections as being set in stone. You always want to use the best information that you have, the latest information that you have, so you can put your best foot forward. These are a critical tool in any facility planning, especially the nature of the facility planning that's going on now. You want to ensure that you have the best data, you have the most recent data. So when we're able to get some more concrete preliminary numbers, we'll be able to tie down better for all of the individual enrollment projections exactly what's happening, and we'll be able to adjust them to know that we have the best information going forward throughout this planning process. I'm not going to spend any more of the time in knowing that we have another item that's really critical on the agenda, but I guess I would like to turn it over to see if the board has any questions on this piece before we move on to the next piece.
As I said at the outset, our goal is that the board develop confidence in these projections so that we can comfortably use them as a basis for planning. So now, the information that was presented was based on the questions that we had at our last meeting. I'm sure there's some follow-up questions. Is there someone who'd like to start? Ms. Gale?
Mike, can we use the most recent Cost Cobb example and talk? Can you explain a little bit more the difference between how you're deciding what's anomalous and what is not a trend? What kind of data can we get so that we can be sure that that 94 number is, like you say, an anomaly?
The best data that we can get would be what's going to happen this coming year, starting to get some of those preliminary enrollments in. Anytime it's very hard to try to explain 1 year when only looking at that 1 year, trying to figure out what the factors are driving that 1 year. We took a look at whether it was late entrance into the system, and that wasn't driving it in this case. What we're looking forward to is being able to get our hands on the preliminary K enrollments for next year, to be able to get an understanding of if the persistency ratio is going to be on the same scale as that 1.4, then we'll know that it's probably not an anomaly and it's maybe the start of a trend, and then we can begin delving deeper to be able to understand what's happening with that trend.
Sorry, I just want to press a little farther because there's a time issue here. We need to make decisions over the next several weeks, and we can't wait until then. Is there any other type of data that we can accumulate in the community that can help provide answers so we get a better understanding of these numbers?
The nature of projections is that time will tell, and you build upon successive years of enrollment information. I just wanted to point out, I mean, when you look at the persistency ratios building up to this year, the difference is staggering. That's why we would call it an anomaly. It's doubled in 5 years, and it's not as if Greenwich Public School Systems is growing everywhere.
Yeah, when you look back at 2008, 2009, in the year 2003, you had over 100 births that were reported for the Coscob neighborhood area, but yet that returned only 74 students, so looking at about a 74% for persistency ratio, you've essentially doubled that in a short amount of time. It lends us to think that maybe something else is going on there.
I just want to clarify, Nancy, you had said that we're making decisions in a couple weeks, and I do think in a few weeks, if we can eliminate options or refine them, fine, but we're not making decisions on a plan in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I'd also like to just add one clarification, if I may, that the options we're presenting tonight are not based on projections. The projections will have an impact as the options begin to be refined. We base those on the October 1st enrollments, the students that were in the building. There's no guesswork as to how many students we are going to have or how many students are being impacted. Those are known students according to the October 1st numbers.
Ms. Dave.
So I'm looking at the Riverside chart, this one. So if I look at the standard deviation line, is it fair to say that after the year 2015, we have low confidence in our projections?
The standard deviation is really a measure of variance from the mean of all projections. So what it's really telling you is that we have a large spread in our projections. But as you can see from the chart, 3 of our projections are very tightly clustered, including the one that we've chosen.
But the standard deviation measures the degree of confidence based on the variability of the data, correct?
Yes, if you had a control, since it's their enrollment projections, we're using as our control the mean of all of our models. We don't have a known value going out a number of years. So that's why there's a little wiggle room in that.
I want to ask a background question just on the model. At the first meeting, you presented a lot of charts on females of childbearing age, the number of housing units owned by 65 and older, vacant residential land, population distribution, etc. Yet as we're talking about enrollment models, you're talking mostly, exclusively about persistency ratios. Can you tell me the correlation? Do you use the former data to just inform what persistency ratio you select, but the model is purely based on births to kindergarten enrollment? The forecasts are?
Exactly. All of those different factors are accounted for in those persistency ratios. If you had a sudden high-density residential development here, you would see, and there were a lot of children that came out of it, you would see it in the persistency ratios.
Because then it would be above 1.
Yeah, and also, it really informs the district-wide projection also. Right. Again, looking at the correlation between your birth decay and your various persistency ratios, and we overlay that through the same time period, and we look at housing sales, housing starts, in order to get an idea of how the school population responded during that point in time. And that's what helped us narrow down on the 3-year, where we saw that during that time frame, that was the start of where everything started to level. Building permits level off at 60 annually. It's where we saw a slight uptick from housing sales, where they were around, I believe, just over 500 3 years ago. There was an uptick of about 600, then over 700. And that's where we set our model parameters based off of that, rather than 5 or 8 years prior, when housing sales were double, permits were much larger. That's how we use that data. And also, it informs our different alternatives, because when you begin developing alternatives, You then lose things like persistency ratios because there's no history there. If you're going to make changes to the configuration of the school system, you need to understand those neighborhoods that are going to be involved in the changes. And that's why we rely on that census data level at the block of geography to be able to inform, you know, our understanding of if we were to impact a certain neighborhood, what is the population there, what is the females of childbearing age, what could we expect it to impact this new district? Because there is really no history when you're enacting these large changes.
And I'd just like to add that the other way in which they really inform the model is that for the first 5 years of the projection horizon, we're using known births, but then we had to project births. And all of that information is important when we're projecting births and the assumptions that we make there.
In some of our communities, anecdotally, there's a significant change to more leased residences and turnover in leases. That's a harder statistic for you to track. How does that really just gets captured by the enrollments of the children, is that correct?
Right, and it may be that in rental housing or leased situations, one of the driving factors of the number of students that comes out of there we often see is the number of bedrooms. So that is it really a family-style housing unit or not? And while there may be turnover in students, frequently you might see the same number of students in general. So our persistency ratios are not tracking an individual student, they're tracking the enrollment numbers. So if there is an area that's gone through some turnover, if it's the same sort of family inhabiting the house, there might not, or unit, there might not be that much change in the actual enrollments.
If, to develop a sense of confidence, is it relevant to go back 5 years and do the same analysis using persistency data and then see how the enrollments played out?
Yeah, what we did was, in addition to the correlation analysis, we tried to test fit our data by picking a point in time and then moving forward by using those persistency ratios. And just as an example, you can see where your birth decays for Riverside were all over the board for a number of years. There was a lot of variance in it. In any given year, some of the years had a large variance, but overall, when we looked at Riverside, for example, with our 3-year persistency ratio, we had about a 5.5% error when we worked our way back and test fit. Some schools, such as Glenville, due to the construction activity there and the renovation there, had much greater variation, but we did look at that. And oddly enough, the year that had the greatest amount of variation to it was the most recent year, which you really never see. That's why for us, and we're going to use the sort of, it raised our eyebrows, it drew a cause for concern when you look at your birth decay and how significantly different it was just this past year over what it's been in the past. And it really bears watching. We've seen it in other communities over the last few years, and some have rebounded immediately back to levels that were similar to the experience before that bubble, and some continue to do trend. That's why we say the best information we can get to get the tightest projections would be one additional year of data or better preliminary data, so we could then best hammer those down. Because without having a crystal ball to peer into, we're really just using our best guess for this.
Mr. Anderson?
I guess from the board's perspective, we want to make sure we've got the right confidence interval, and the hard part is the more and more we drill down, the looser that confidence becomes, because we are looking at trends, and bold statement here, trends are trending to take us to a new spot, and then we kind of flatline out from there for 5 to 10 years. So the big thing is we've got to make sure we've got the right confidence on the persistency rates, the birth rates, and then most importantly, the sensitivity off of those numbers. So if you look at like Cobb that had the big jump on their persistency up to the 141, we as a board need to decide if we can understand why that's happening and how much confidence we're going to have in having a higher persistency rate on like that. Conversely, if you look at Riverside, where it still has a net inflow on the persistency, it's much lower than it used to be. It used to be 177, this year was 134. That combined with lower birth rates puts that trend that much more down, which compounds the look of the answer. If you look at the overall
district, there's not a whole lot of variability. It's kind of like, when you flip the coin 50 times, you should get about 25 heads and 25 tails. But when you flip it one time, you're going to get a head or a tail. We've got to be very comfortable that our overall facilities, which look to be right-sized, so there's no talk of closing schools or anything like that, but we just have the right person at the right schools, the right numbers for what we think each school can handle. And I think one of the keys for the board is we are going to have to come up with that confidence interval literally at each school level.
Bill, did you want to?
Yeah, it might help inform that question, either Mike or Rebecca, if you could reflect on how other boards of education work, because you have done this, how you have helped guide them to that proper confidence interval. Because as you have presented quite clearly, the fewer the numbers we have to work with, the greater variability. The more numbers we have, the less variability. So that means district-wide, it's going to have to be more solid, but school by school, there's a lot of fluctuations. So how have you helped other boards with this question?
I really think when you begin looking into the numbers, you can clearly see some of the trends that are going on, especially when you look at Riverside in particular, that this is the classic leading edge of a decline when you have 2 successive years of significantly lower class sizes than you've been. It's not solely driven by our projections, this decline that we're projecting. When you begin looking at what classes are matriculating through the middle school level, and these are very large classes, 87, last year was 91, this year is 87, followed by 87, you even have 90 at second grade, and begin looking at lower class sizes of 60s and 70s, well, that loss of 20 students or so across a number of grades, 6 grades to be exact, you're looking at a fairly steep decline. It's cumulative. When you look at it in the context we're seeing right now, where a drop from 520 to 482, well, what's driving that? It's 2 low class sizes. Those last 2 incoming Ks were lower class sizes. We have the birth data behind it. I ran a projection model just using the 1.72, which is the highest that we recorded in recent past, and we still had a significant decline at Riverside, even using the highest persistency ratio that has been recorded in recent past. A lot of the driver is the births. To say that that's not going to change, it could very well change. Projections are most accurate within that first 5-year window, especially most recently within those first few years. Things are changing rapidly. We're seeing new trends emerging. We're seeing it in the data here. I would have, when we look at our enrollment projections, you begin looking at the tight clustering for those first few years of data going out 4 or 5 years. That's pretty good grouping when you consider the overall changes in the community. When you begin looking at the birth decay overall in Greenwich, you could have a fair amount of confidence in that. This is the similar data that we would discuss with other communities to rely on. When you begin getting into the process of instilling confidence, you're already at the point in some of these school facilities where overcrowding could be an issue, is an issue, underutilization is an issue. This is just saying, is it most likely to continue? Well, I guess the answer is, yes, it is at certain schools, and no, it is, and no, it's not going to get worse at other schools. So we're using this as a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all of saying that we're going to have X number of kids and we're going to stake our reputation on it. We're going to have X number of kindergartners. You see the fluctuations in the numbers. There's almost no way to pick a persistency ratio with that. You could be spot on for each of these given years. It would be like winning Powerball.
Mr. Sherry.
I tend to think I'm a reasonably intelligent guy, but this is a lot to digest. And for me, it defies the logic, and maybe it's just because I have insider knowledge. I've lived here for over 20 years, so I know the neighborhoods, and then I go see these numbers, and I think for a lot of people in the community, it just defies what they actually know about these individual neighborhoods. So I think, I'm glad you said we're not rushing to make any decisions, because I think we are dealing with a tremendous number of anomalies. And I wanted to ask you about those anomalies. We've had the sharpest economic decline in, I don't know, 80 years at least. This community has a very high exposure to the industries that were affected in that, particularly banking and finance. In many neighborhoods, a lot of the demographics that you talk about, that you use, kind of went right off a cliff. Our real estate sales went right through the floor. That happened nationally, but it particularly happened here. We also had a huge bubble before that in construction starts, remodeling, what have you. The actual economic demographics of the town changed. The average income increased. The cost of real estate changed. I mean, there were real extremes. And in some of these neighborhoods that we're talking about incredible swings are places where that was particularly acute. Riverside proceeded to go tear down small housing stock and build very, very large new dwellings. I guess the question is, I understand the point on the persistency ratios, I understand looking at live births. I'm wondering how we really, to use your terminology, normalize for these anomalies. In our community, the economy is just starting to recover. My wife has been pressing me on a remodeling project we want to do in our house, and now, unfortunately, everyone who was not busy is completely busy, so I'm in trouble for that. I'm just wondering if we're looking at, because you referenced a lot of data that is 3 and 5 years. And in our community, which I think happened nationally, but I have the impression it was more acute here, were such swings and such huge anomalies. I get very nervous taking that data set, projecting it forward, and I'm not questioning essentially your success in modeling and your experience in modeling, but it defies logic for me that Riverside would all of a sudden crash through the floor and drop 136 kids.
Excuse me, we are running a meeting. Thank you.
And I understand the data we're looking at. We haven't redrawn, to the best of my knowledge, we have not redrawn districts in Greenwich in maybe 12, 13 years, I think it was. And if we're going to use this data to go take care of projected capacity problems, you know, there is no crystal ball, I get that, but we really need to get this right. There's a separate question, but I'm not sure why we need to go rip along and talk about redistricting all of Greenwich at the moment. That will come to. But what can you say about the anomalies? And then the other, and there are others, you know, all of a sudden Coscop's not going to get almost 100 new kids. I know that neighborhood too. What would you recommend that we could do to get a lot more comfortable? I think I heard one of yours, which is get another year of data. So that essentially is an argument for maybe things are normalizing, let it play out, see how it develops, and maybe you get a more normal pattern. Anyway, I think I've explained it, and I'd be interested in your comment.
Aside from sending a survey out the main concern is the birth decay. Kindergarten students find out how long they've been in their household, how long they've been in the neighborhood, to get an understanding for mobility patterns, to get to that level of specificity where you would actually have a survey of the parents to be able to ascertain whether or not it directly correlates to births. Were they there 5 years ago? Have they moved in, and why? That would really be the only way I would be able to hammer it down and be able to say definitively, provided that the questions were answered honestly, that this is what is driving the factor behind us. There's so many influences when you begin looking at persistency ratios. We know it's the economy, it's the housing, it's everything. Back before the recession, there was a lot of stability for a number of years, and the rule of thumb in demographics at that time was to go back as many years as you're going to go forward. That was kind of the rule of thumb. And it was predicated on that, the recent past is a predictor of the future, and when things are either flat steady increase, steady decline, that would be a good indicator going forward. Well, to go back a number of years and use a lot of historic data doesn't really work here when you look at the dramatic changes that have impacted every single factor that drives enrollment. This is a very difficult time to be able to hammer down long-range projections at an individual school level. You know, district-wide projections, especially for larger systems, you know, they're much more adaptable to change. You know, what we're seeing now is, you look at Greenwich, you're down 100 births from where you were 5 to 10 years ago, but yet your persistency ratios are up, so your enrollment projections are flat. So what it tells us overall in the community is that there's people moving in with children that are going to be school age soon, that are going to be coming in as kindergartners. That's what it tells us overall. At the neighborhood level, because the sample sizes are so small, especially at some of these schools for the individual kindergarten students, you can't put that level of confidence on it because there could be many other factors at play there. What we're using this for is really just a planning tool to understand which direction the demographics are going in. You know, you cannot basically set in stone that I'm 100% positive that the enrollment's going to be this. If there's an observed change, if we're seeing early registrations that are, you know, either bucking a trend. Yeah. She won't sit though. She won't sit. She's good. It's her last public meeting until she's. Yeah. But you know, you're really looking for that information to either validate the trend or say yes, this is an anomaly, and we're going to stay the course. Other than that, there really is no other way to be able to really ascertain what is going on.
I also just want to add, in the case of Riverside, because it keeps getting brought up, the birth numbers play out exactly what you said. There was a lot of upheaval maybe in the neighborhood turnover. When you look at births 5 years ago to 10 years ago, you were in the 60s, and now these are known births. They're in the 30s and the 40s. These have not yet entered your school system. This is known data, though. The other thing to look at is, while the birth decay ratio was unusual this year, unusually low, so was K to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. You went from above 1 to 0.9. So something else is going on there too. We're not sure what that is. It may be enrolling in private schools. Maybe, you know, new residents in that neighborhood are not going to opt into Riverside as much as the old guard did. So there's something else going on there. So you can't just focus narrowly on, you know, that anomalous birth decay and the known births and say, well, you know, this could turn around. Yes, it could all turn around, but you have to realize that there's a compounding factor that is likely to play out. There's a range, of course, of what the projections might be, but the trend downward appears to be pretty obvious. Okay.
Yeah, just one more thing. I'm glad you pointed that out, Rebecca. When you look at 2011, in your second grade, you had 91 students matriculating on to third grade. This year, dropped to 82. That's 90%. That's looking up the chart. That's the lowest you've had since 2002, 2003. You know, you look at the long-term average, the recent average is 96, 97%. So it's really not just at one level. There's other factors at play. You know, aside from interviews, there's really no other way to figure out what is going on. But we take all of this into consideration, and this is what, you know, we're really building this model and projection on. Trying to use those last 3 years with the understanding that we all know things have radically changed, and the last 3 years are probably our best predictor of what's going to happen for the next 3, possibly beyond.
I guess I was just, I mean, I don't want to go through the detail, but I mean, if you change the housing stock, the people who tend to move into that neighborhood are in an industry that they couldn't move. And now when they're actually moving in, maybe they have households that are larger than 2, 2.5 kids, maybe 4. That could dramatically swing this projection. Is that true? Yes.
It's true, and they may also enroll in private school more than the previous
Maybe
housing.
that's true too, right?
And
if there were capacity in the private schools, right? That would be another thing.
Right, and so likely those things are balanced out.
And I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, I know there's no way to account for all these things in your model. We'd have to give you a whole bunch more information that you could go find statistically. But I guess I just want to get this in a final clip, because I saw very high standard deviation in some of these neighborhoods with these big swings. We were talking about confidence before. I wasn't interested in confidence. I took it as variance because I understand it to be variance from the mean and the model. Those are some pretty decent variances there, which means this thing could swing. And if it swings and we get it wrong, we could be making some pretty substantial mistakes.
I'd like to, just before you respond, say that as we go forward, we're going to have to include ranges, I think, in enrollment and not just one particular number. We do have to account for the deviation, especially as we go out further years. Mr. Anderson, you know.
That was, I think, one of the things that everybody gets worried about is there is no golden number that's going to come out. What is the sensitivity? So can we take each school and say, gee, if we take birth rates are what birth rates are, but if we increase them 25%, decrease them 25%, take the persistency rates at each school that we've actually experienced and say, what is the 5-year high, what is the 5-year low, and then run it through a school system. So you can actually sit there and say, gee, if we don't believe COSCOP's persistency, and just say, you think it's 1.0 compared to last year's 1.4, if you run that through the system, that would get you a variance of 180 kids, 30 kids a year. So that gives us our delta of how big we're playing with. Same thing with Riverside. If we think the persistency belongs higher, back towards the 1.7 or so, what's that mean on a basis? It's about 20 kids per class, or 120. So it gives us some idea of how much variation we have around the number. We know the number's wrong, we get that, but it's the best estimate that we can make of what is the variance that we need to take off of that. So I think if we had one pager that had a couple of known parameters, taking it up and taking it down, and turning that into students, how many students at that school, it gives us a lot more confidence in trying to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, just to answer your question, we are showing those ranges on our model. So I have the October projection report, and Riverside was projected totally different methodology than we used, but done internally. In 2017, 2018, Riverside was projected to be 400 students, a loss of 402 students, a loss of 79, where we are today. What was that?
Your number is now 133, which is another 50 kids, right?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
And if you were to apply a large range to our projections and say that it could vary by 20 per grade level, your utilization is already at such a high level across the board for the elementary schools. I don't think that would do us any good in this planning process, because what we're talking about is being able to determine the number of students that can essentially fit in the building. 20 students one way or another, or 10 students one way or another across a number of schools, it would really just make this exercise much more difficult. So I think what we all need to do is understand the projections are a planning tool. Use the latest data that we have. Now, we use students that are in the system now when we develop all of our scenarios, all these mechanisms that we're presenting to you tonight, and with the understanding of, we're going to be able to look forward, look ahead at what the impacts would be, but we're still going to have to rely on these numbers to look ahead. But we're basing it on the numbers, the knowns that are there right now in the system.
My sense is we may be moving towards the need to discuss the options, and I might make an observation without, and I want to be clear, I don't have a particular preference around any options. My preference is that this kind of sophisticated analysis we can begin to bring into Greenwich in much more rapid feedback time. My sense is we've not in Greenwich had this sort of sophisticated analysis around enrollment trends, what it means in terms of where students are in any recent time. We do know we have several overcrowded schools, and like it or not, we are under citation of the state around a particular law. Again, I'm not saying what the solution is, but what I think is important going forward for us as a district, board, administration, and community is to say this kind of data, this kind of information, how do we bring it much more regularly into our decision making and have rapid feedback on it? Observation, as I've watched other communities and districts grapple with this kind of tough problem, you don't get to the point of, aha, perfect data, now we can move forward. Rather, it's much more of a spiral. You get some degree of comfort, you make the decisions you can, you keep coming back to the data, is it right? You then make those decisions you can, you keep coming back to the data, you then make additional decisions. But there's not going to be a simple moment where you say, data's perfect, we can move forward, or data's not perfect, we can't move forward. You figure out what decisions you can make and which ones you can't. So I would hope we can go forward and begin to have much more of this type of ongoing analysis. As head spinning as it may be, we've got to do that to make the right decisions.
Okay, so what I would like to ask board members to do is, as you have specific questions at new data analysis that you want us to consider to perform, forward those questions to me, and then we will work with the consultant on the timing and how best to respond to those questions. And I'd like to move on to options. Mr. Von Braun, did you want to make a comment on the enrollment projections, or?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I've listened to a lot of discussion this evening and previous evenings about statistical analysis. And what we're trying to do is use numbers to define human behavior. And M&M earlier this evening said something to the effect of, you know, unless we do interviews with people, we're not going to know what they're really going to do. I think it's time for us to do some substantial human research on what the people are doing. Want to not only have happen, but what they're going to do. If we were trying to introduce a new product, we would be thrown out of our company if we didn't do a substantial amount of consumer research to find out what the customers want. This room is full of customers of the school system. Absent that additional dimension, we can debate the numbers 6 ways from Sunday. We're going to have nothing against which to compare.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to the next conversation, and we'll circle back to next steps and consider Mr. Von Braun's suggestions in that light. So the next part of Milena McBroom's presentation is a preliminary review of alternative options. It is not intended to be any specific suggestion for something that we would adopt as it's presented in these charts. They outline approaches to take. They use existing data, the current enrollment and the current attendance zones, to model some things for illustrative purposes. But then we would need to define what next steps we want to take with this part of the analysis. Peter.
Are we going to hear them all at once and then come back to them, or one at a time, or how did you intend to do this?
I would like them to go through the whole presentation first, and then we'll circle back.
All right, we'll get started on our preliminary review of the different mechanisms. I'd like to go through the guiding principles. 4 guiding principles are to provide the best possible education to every student enrolled in the Greenwich Public School System, maintain the current elementary program delivery model and average class sizes that you all well know, operate the school system as efficiently as possible within the statutory mandates and guidelines, and probably should be at the top, but minimize changes to the neighborhood attendance areas and the amount of time it takes to transport students to and from school. Ultimately, the disruption caused by the parents. Nothing that we're going to show tonight is a plan or a proposal. All this is just the different mechanisms to achieve your enrollment balancing mandate, the objectives that you have from your educational standpoint, in order to facilitate a thoughtful discussion. That's really what we're here for, is a thoughtful discussion. Put some ideas out, put them forward, get some feedback on it, so then we can get an idea of what direction the board is leaning into, so we could really focus our efforts and to be able to provide the best product and the best solution. These are all conceptual in nature. All they are is for evaluation, just to get some ideas of the different mechanisms. They're intended to guide the discussion. We really want to focus on the mechanism of options, look at what each one entails, what the impacts are going to be, and what the ultimate outcome from each of these options can be. We had some criteria early on when we began the process of taking a look at these different mechanisms. They looked at utilization. Utilization across the board is high. It's variable amongst the schools. They looked at hitting their 95% target at each of the elementary schools, to be able to get the racial balance within 15%. What that would put each of the schools at would be below the impending balance. As Chair mentioned earlier, 25% is the threshold when they notify a school of being imbalanced. And also to minimum number of students to be disrupted as possible, and to look at boundaries that retain the character of the community. If you take a look at Greenwich and you understand that there's distinct neighborhoods, there's distinct character there, that there's tight-knit communities within a community. So we looked at achieving contiguous attendance areas to try to follow logical boundaries. We prepared 2 different options. This is really a redistricting. What this looks at is changing boundaries, shifting attendance areas, taking a look at where students are, where births are occurring, and be able to align the boundaries so that you're best achieving all the objectives. Be able to gauge the impact on these, on how many students are impacted, how difficult would it be to maintain these contiguous boundaries. The geography of Greenwich is very challenging when you begin to look at 2 major highways, a lot of bays, looking at redistricting between the rivers. This makes it extremely difficult. You have different densities in different areas. There's a lot going on, a lot of constraints, if you will, to traditional redistricting. This is scenario A. Looking at the mechanism of scenario A, this scenario involved shifting boundaries at each and every one of the districts. What we did was we took a look at the existing magnet schools. We retained those magnet school programming. Students that were from out of district, so students who resided or went to a magnet school or lived outside of that attendance area, they were held in place. We then adjusted the boundaries around the capacity and took a look at what the performance was from a standpoint of racially balancing the schools. You can see in this scenario, the second column, now these numbers include a capacity that's slightly different, that's in your handout. What we included in the capacity this time, what we didn't have during the existing conditions, was we accounted for the pre-K students. We held those at the same location, even though it's our understanding that as capacity shifts in the schools, pre-K is moved around. The reason we did so was because the way the state calculates racial balance, they do it 2 different ways. If you have pre-K in a certain number of schools, those are looked at like schools, and it's a different calculation than schools that are just K-5, so it was a necessity to do that. Overall, we're looking at a fairly high level of utilization across the board. We're looking at almost all schools are above 90%. We have North Street at 88, ISD at 89%. When we begin to look at how it performs from a racial balance standpoint, well, what jumps out at us, despite our efforts in doing the redistricting, we still weren't able to get New Leb below that critical imbalance, that 25% threshold. We were able to achieve it at Hamilton Ave. And looking at the proximity of the 2 schools that are racially imbalanced, being neighboring schools doesn't make it any easier to redistrict. Also the fact that we have Long Island Sound to the south and New York to the west, where you're sort of hemmed into a corner, really isn't conducive to a traditional redistricting, especially when you're looking at overcrowding and racial imbalance at those schools. Overall, this mechanism would look at moving about 850 elementary students. Even though it achieves better overall utilization across the board at all the schools, Hamilton Ave is no longer in balance. It does not achieve racial balance at New Leb. Our second scenario is just different boundaries under the same mechanism. This scenario also had improved utilization. One of the key pieces of this scenario was that it did achieve racial balance by a small margin at New Leb. When we began looking at a lot of the census data, the birth data that we have from the state going out a number of years also gives us an indicator, because with that birth data is also ethnicity and race. So we have an understanding of what impact or what the projection would be as far as a percent minority going forward, and we don't believe that this would be a very sustainable option. This option moves 50 more students, 900 students. I mentioned it improved the balance overall, but we don't think it would be sustainable from the criteria of racially balancing the schools. We're looking at a total of 21%, 20% of the students This analysis also does not include the impact of parents opting out of the system due to redistricting. That's one of those things that it would be an unknown. The only way to gather that is working through the community, being able to listen to surveys, being able to get a response at what the impact of redistricting would be, running different simulations in that manner. Rebecca will run us through the second option, which is a district-wide choice.
So district-wide choice, I believe, was also an option discussed by the Board of Ed previously, and we were given some criteria by the administration. Basically, the way this would work is that upon registration into Greenwich school system, parents would choose first, second, and third choice school. Students would either win a seat in a choice school through a lottery, or they would just be assigned to their choice school. And anyone not placed in a choice school would then be randomly assigned based on space in the system. So when we look at the mechanics behind an option like this, it really would be incumbent upon the board to do extensive survey work. You really would have to understand the magnet theme preferences, geographic preferences, and when you look at any district that actually has implemented district-wide choice, they spend a significant amount of time and they exert a significant amount of effort in doing surveys. There was a district we were reading about where they actually would do targeted geographic surveying and then run simulations based on the responses. And they spent about a year of just running different simulations before they felt confident in how they could implement such a program. And our take on this option is that in a system such as Greenwich, where there is already very strong preference for neighborhood schools, that you are likely to get survey results that indicate geographic preference, very strong geographic preference. So that an option such as this would really hinge upon very, very attractive magnet programming in order to have parents choose to attend other schools than a neighborhood school. And you may end up with placing a burden on your administration to really manage a complicated lottery process, a complicated process of randomly assigning students, managing the choice aspect of things becomes a very significant burden on administrations, as well as transportation. And in the end, you may not achieve racial balance. You would likely be able to improve your enrollment balance, but you may not achieve racial balance. I'm going to take us through the partial magnet option as well. This was another option I believe the Board of Ed has discussed previously. The criteria given to us by the administration was that the options upon registration would be to either enter a neighborhood school or a magnet school. You would revise your current magnet school model based on an evaluation of the effectiveness of your current magnets, and students would be placed based on parent selection, lottery, or administrative placement based on space considerations. In order to really run just a concept on this, we added the concept of zonal choice option. We believe that even with a partial magnet system, even if it were a very successful magnet programming, you would still need to achieve your enrollment balancing objectives, have to sort of zone the community in order to balance some of your smaller schools with your larger schools. So in this option, this conceptual option that we developed, there are 3 partial magnet schools. Partial meaning that they still have a neighborhood district behind them, but they have a certain number of seats open to magnet students. The administration had given us the information to keep New Web as a magnet, North Street as a magnet, and ISD. So that is what we're showing here. There would be 1 magnet in each zone. Basically, these would be called magnet zones, and they were developed based on enrollment patterns and the capacity of the existing facilities. We would assume that pre-K would get cited, although we didn't try to cite it, at 1 school per magnet zone. And that way you are sort of giving pre-K permanent space and not moving it depending on capacity every year. Again, this option, as well as pretty much all of the non-redistricting options, would depend on very successful magnet programming to entice parents to opt out of their neighborhood school into a magnet school. And you would still need to look at how you would handle cross-zone, cross-magnet zone placement and develop some policies around that. So This is just an idea. It's, again, not a plan or a proposal of how you might zone the entire school district. You can see there are 3 zones set up there. Again, this is all just an idea. We ran some quick calculations to see how it would work out using just K through 5 enrollments. The really important thing to note in this option is how significantly you would have to increase your magnet programming. So if you take a look at Magnet Zone 1, as we were calling it, you would need to have about 100 seats at New Leb actually open to magnet students and filled by magnet students. So you would be significantly reducing the number of neighborhood students that you could take in there. And because of that, we sort of added that zonal choice component in order to meet your enrollment balancing objectives. We paired it with Parkway, where you have declining enrollments in Glenville, but in order to improve your racial balance, you would likely have to start defining preference areas in order to attract students from certain areas into the magnet program. So here you can see what we thought would be preference areas. Also, North Street, under this scenario, would become a magnet, and there would be 235 seats for magnet students at North Street. So again, that's a significant number, and it would require movement of residents of the North Street district to other schools within the zone, and preferably Parkway, where you have a declining enrollment. So we defined some preference areas for this as well, because again, to try to improve your racial balance, you would likely need to define some preference areas to get into the magnet. And then the final magnet would be at ISD, where 115 seats would be reserved for magnet students. And there is a preference area, basically the old Greenwich district. So the key point really is that you would be increasing your magnet program to a total of 450 students in 3 different magnet schools. Right now you have 270 magnet students spread across 4 schools. So you would really need to develop some highly attractive magnet programming in order for this option to work. There would be no redistricting technically. There would be the magnet zoning. And again, there would be, the onus would fall on the administration to assign students if the magnet programming and lottery doesn't play out the way that you hope. But you would likely be able to achieve better enrollment balancing and as well as racial balancing.
The last option mechanism we're looking at would be reconfiguration. Similar to the prior to that, Rebecca discussed, this involves 3 inter-district magnets. Remaining schools reconfigured to pre-K 2nd and 3rd through 5 and paired together. We're looking at a redistricting effort as part of this to better balance the enrollment, better to achieve the pairing, and also, similar to the other options, this also is highly dependent on the attraction of the magnet programming. We understand that this option, no matter which way you pair the schools, whether it's the way we're showing today, would be very difficult to keep intact the existing feeder patterns that you have established for your middle schools. This looks at having Glenville, ISD, and North Street as your K-5 magnets, and sister school pairing of Cos-Cob, Riverside, Hamilton-Curtis, New Lebanon Parkway, and North Mianus and Old Greenwich. What this does is, by having a larger geographic grouping and pairings, it makes you less susceptible to fluctuations, allows you to operate a system more efficiently, having the larger geographic area and the larger groupings, and breaking up the schools also achieves the enrollment balancing from a racial balance standpoint. When you begin looking at the numbers with the understanding of Greenwich being around 35% right now for the elementary schools, you're looking at a pre-K pairing for minorities of about 36% at the pre-K schools. For the 3-5 schools, about 32%. So it would achieve that. We cite it within each of the pairing zones, a magnet school. You look to the right, there would have to be a significant draw because you have an excess enrollment based on the sistering of the schools of about 1,100 students. You look at the magnet schools that we're illustrating here, you're looking at a capacity of about 1,230. So we'll be creating the draw from each of those zones and also cross the zones in order to make it successful. I will just continue on. I know you all have handouts in front of you. This requires, just to some of the considerations, a highly attractive magnet programming. There's less reliance on this because of the larger pairings, larger geography of administrative placements of students, provided the magnet programs are successfully designed. Paired districts allow for achieving of better racial balance and also better overall utilization. And that wraps up our formal presentation part of the second component, and I'll turn it over to the board for a discussion on that.
While we're gathering here, as administration here, since you saw the word administration a lot of this presentation, we make an important comment in terms of transmittal of the Maloney McBroom work to the board and to the community to consider. You may wonder about those four options. Anyone who has examined the issue of student assignment, where students are go to school, this captures the universe of all options that may be out there. The board over the last 5, 6, 7 months has been looking at a range of particular options. As we work as an administration with Maloney McBroom on this, we said, conceptually, how can we capture that range of options that are out there to help the board begin to, in a sense, experiment, the community experiment at the thought level, the planning level, with what might be. As you think about student assignment, you have neighborhood schools, as we have it. You have choice, school choice, which typically is magnet. Within your neighborhood schools, most communities at some point have to redistrict a bit. And then you may have areas of choice. You break up a district into several subparts. So what you've seen here, if you went out to study the literature, study the experts, study all the material, you have in front of you four options that capture any and all approaches to trying to deal with how students are assigned to school. Now the board and you and us can work with what does this mean, what doesn't mean at a conceptual level before any one decision is made. So I want to be clear that there weren't options left aside because these four conceptual models really pick up any potential approach.
I guess I feel that is worth repeating. The board asked for show us the options. It didn't say show us things that we might like. So we're with you on some of the reactions to what we've seen. I'd like to now to walk through some of these. Maybe we should do it in order, though I think we have fewer comments on some than others. But the full redistricting option, just the takeaway clearly was its significant impact on families, and it ultimately can't solve our racial balance for the longer term, even for more than 2 or 3 years, is some of the takeaway on the chart. Are there comments anybody wants to make on that option? Doesn't seem to do much for us. Ms. Dayton.
I would not support it at all in any situation because it doesn't help us at all with racial balance. Our consultants have said it's not sustainable, so I think we should move to the next option.
Okay, option number 2, district-wide choice. That would mean we would change from our current district of having neighborhood schools where there would be no neighborhood schools. Houses wouldn't be zoned to any one school, and instead, as kids enroll, there would be choices. Clearly, also, that I don't believe would be a very popular solution, and I don't think there would be much support on this board for that as well. Is there anybody who wants to comment more on that option? Peter?
I guess, Leslie, I'm still stuck back on the statement that came before. I don't agree with the statement that the only alternatives for us are all captured in the 4 things that are
There are a range of options that can be put together in a variety of ways to create a new option. But if you're talking about how you balance enrollment, let's not even talk about racial balance, but we have schools that are over capacity and some schools underutilized. There are only so many ways to move families. There's forced moving and there's choice moving. And so then we have ranges of ways to get that accomplished, but I don't think we've seen the universe. We've certainly seen the each mechanism here, but we can put them together in different ways.
If I might clarify, Peter, what I was saying is that if you go out there to say what is the full way to think about assignment of students, in some mix and match way, everything in those 4 options, it may not be the particular option, but the only way you can think about it is neighborhood schools, choice with magnet schools. You can think about realigning your neighborhood school areas. You can think about mixing and matching this. I'm not saying these for particular, but short of putting in a voucher system or something like that, there is no other way. So I'm not saying these themselves unified only 4, but I'm trying to say conceptually, the more tries to say, here's a data set. He says, here's a data set. How do we understand what this means? At least Malone and Broom has said, if you think about magnet schools, here's what it means in a variety of ways. If you think about redistricting, here's what it means. If you think about staying with neighborhood schools, here's what it means. Those are the 3 broad areas. It's not investing in one of these options.
Okay, let's go to talking about what we either see or don't see on these sheets that we may want to think about as we move forward on the next time. Ms. Kale, did you have?
Yep. Let's talk about option. Great.
Yep.
There you go.
Go ahead.
I have so many questions about this one particular option, and first I agree with Peter on Run that the magnet school feature of this option really requires a lot of public input, so we make sure that we're getting something that is attractive to the families and is what they want in a magnet school. I'm wondering if the magnet schools can be different in each zone in this option. I also have a question about some of our IB schools and if those will remain IB schools and what happens to Hamilton Avenue, which is a magnet school right now and isn't a magnet school, I think, in that option. But my biggest question has to do with New Lebanon because I'm still concerned that we're going to face facilities utilization issues in that school. That district is getting to be bigger and bigger, and I don't think that that building can accommodate all the students that we're going to see in that school in the coming years. So I guess those are my questions for now on option 3, which I'm very interested in.
Ms. Dayton?
I don't feel comfortable discussing option 3 at all because of the emphasis placed on central administration determining placements for students. I'm not clear on the legality of it. I'm not clear on the mechanism of it. And until I have more information, I'm very uncomfortable indicating whether or not I favor option 3. Is there any further information we can get from our consultants on how that would play out?
I'm looking at my guess is that, again, we're still at a fairly conceptual level, so there's probably a lot of ways to address it, and nothing on here is set in stone with how the details play out. But can you provide examples of how it may be done?
Right, and just to address the first questions, this was just an idea. Those schools were given to us as the magnets. We even mentioned that New Leb is not likely to serve the system well as a magnet because of the space limitations there. But the way that it would play out, again, really hinges upon having successful magnet programs where you have a lottery, you have more students applying to get into the magnet than you have seats for. That's really what this would hinge on successfully, how this could successfully work. As far as the placement, it would come down to a space issue where you have too many students trying to get into a magnet program, so you have to place them elsewhere. It's not much different than what you might already be doing, actually, with the way that pre-K gets moved based on space. When you have space issues, it often comes down to an administration placing where there is capacity available.
An alternative to that feature, which is equally difficult to deal with, is as we create magnets, is to look to not retain, changing the neighborhood zone to create more seats just structurally, and then there isn't the annual revisiting. Of course, that is a difficult thing to do as well.
I'd like to reinforce what Peter and Nancy said about the survey of the consumers, Peter calls them. I don't think there's anybody on this board, anybody in the administration, anybody in the audience that wants to force a single parent to send their child to a school that they wouldn't otherwise choose. So I think in order to make that happen, the key thing is to ask a family in the western side of town, for example, in Lebanon, that it's overcrowded, what type of school would incentivize you to move your kid, to maybe have to, give up walking your child to school to another school. And the same thing with someone, from Costco. What would make you do it? And I think we need to make the parents part of the process. It's not just asking them what would do it, but they should be part of the creation of the magnet. And I think if we focus our energy on that, on creating that type of magnet that would entice a parent to send their kid to a different school, then perhaps we can arrive at a solution where it's all voluntary. And we don't have to, the state does not say it has to be racially balanced from day one. So we actually can try a year where it's voluntary, and we can make adjustments as we go. So
I agree that I think whatever we decide to do, we should phase in so that as we go, we can iron out the kinks. We can also see if the data is supporting what we're doing. I also think it's not the sending people only who should, the sending students, but I think it's the school that receives them. Everybody's going to be somewhat inconvenienced, and I think everybody should then benefit from whatever it is, whether it's a change in the hours of the school rather than just a theme school, magnet school, but maybe it's in hours. And I think we have to think of this, all of the schools, and how they're all going to be impacted to maybe a small degree or some degree, that would make sure that everybody benefits from these changes.
Just staying right on that similar thought. Right now, the value that people perceive in our magnet schools is not great enough to really make a ton of changes. So if we are to go to zonal or even just one magnet, we need to make that something that has much more of a game changer characteristic, whether it's an extended day of 8 to 5, or it's some theme that people really, really place high value on. What we do want to do is what Ms. Ospina was saying, where you want to minimize involuntary student movement and maximize voluntary student movement by making that option more valuable to people. It doesn't matter if you're on the west side, the east side, backcountry, whatever. If you perceive greater option value, you're going to be more likely to go to that school and help voluntarily solve a problem versus being told how you're going to solve the problem. So I think it has to be a very, very strong magnet program. It can't be something that's just tweaked a little bit off of our base right now.
Mr. Sherman.
I guess I'm in a fundamentally different place than my colleagues on the board. I mean, it just sounds like we've immediately veered into a focus on complying with the state law. I mean, I have my own views on that. I think it's potentially unconstitutional. It's certainly more. So I guess I'm in a place where I'm not comfortable. Magnet schools by nature create inequities in a public school system. It creates a system of special haves versus other children who have other things, and I'm not interested in creating a system of have and have-nots in a public school system. You know, so I guess, and the other thing that's a little troubling is we've tried this in Greenwich. It's been done numerous times. Even before I was on the board, people have tweaked it and diddled with it, and it hasn't achieved this objective that the state has. So I'm troubled that we just kind of blew by 1, 2, and now we're off in talking about magnet themes. And I guess I'd like to understand, if we're going to look at these options, why we think we're going to have a different outcome, and we're not going to be back here having the same conversation, I don't know, 3 years from now, 5 years from now.
I want to remind you what I said at the beginning, which is that we're talking, we identified that we are going to pursue revisiting the court case and the situation on the statute. I said that at the outset that that's going on. However, while we are going to have those conversations with council, we still are working on all fronts, so we're in a position to take the necessary action in the time frame that we have to do that, and that's why we're talking about options now. So I'm sorry if you missed that point.
No, I understood that point, Leslie, but the thing that I'm we're talking about options, and we seem to have gone quite quickly to, you know, things that essentially rip apart the district to achieve this. I think there are, if we decided as a board, and I think, you know, we have to operate with the assumption now we need to do something because the law is there, and I think it's the consensus of the board that we want to respond to the state in some way. I think there are other options that are short of ripping the community apart with redistricting, doubling and tripling down on magnets. I think there are some other options.
Once again, I said that that was the purpose of our conversation,
yeah.
So we can get to some other ideas. Would you like to present some other things you would like to explore?
Well, I guess I want to go back and explore these options on these magnets. And like option 2 is that require highly attractive magnet programs. We seem to have just veered off into a conversation a moment ago that we need to have multiple magnets and they need to be much better than the ones they are.
Option 2 is where there's choice. There's no neighborhood school, so each school would have its own independent theme, and it's based on the 11 options people would have, that they would select their top 3 choices of where they would like to attend the district. Am I correct that I'm understanding the option?
Yeah, and I guess I was on a question on option 2, which is if the theory is people are, which is probably some of the state's contention, people are trapped in schools that they don't want to be in because we do it with neighborhood schools and we actually did open choice. And if we actually went out to the community and let people run open choice, maybe we didn't actually implement it, we might actually find out, do people really want to move, particularly in the ethnic or racial groups that the state seems to think really want to move and want to land someplace else. So when I look at option 2, it said it would require development of highly attractive themes and would require the administration to place significant numbers of children to achieve balance. Seems to me maybe we would want to find out, as Peter von Braun suggested in the beginning, through some real practical implementation, do people really want to move? And what would people do if the entire district was open choice?
I think that's one of the steps that we can take as we look forward to developing options as we go forward, is to get that information. I think we do know, we've had feedback from many communities as we've talked to communities. We haven't heard one that says we want to move out of our school. Everybody pretty much universally likes neighborhood schools as they're delivered in Greenwich. They may want to improve their school, they may want changes, but we haven't heard any outcry that we want movement. So again, that kind of assumption can be substantiated and should be substantiated, but I'm not hearing that. I don't know if you are. And I also have never heard the state say they're imposing the state's law because of choices for parents. We'd have to go back to the discussion at the legislature when they instituted the law 30, 40 years ago to really understand why they put this in place. But again, we're making an assumption too of what the State Board of Ed is looking for. At this point, it's a matter of compliance with the statute as written, not really looking at the rationale behind it.
Well, might it make sense to ask them?
Well, I've had extensive conversations with them on this. The state is simply interested in an outcome. And there's no one in this room who agrees with the situation we're in. There's no one in this room who agrees with the threat to neighborhood schools. The issue is right now, and the board chair said it, and we are going to go back and look at how we might consider the legality of this issue. But I've talked a lot with the commissioner, I've talked with the top lawyer for the Department of Ed. What they look at is outcome. The rationale and all the rest, they don't look at that. They don't look at the plan. They just look at what is the outcome. So we've had those conversations. I can report on at more length on.
Mrs. Beaman.
I just want to clarify the process. We were asked to go option by option. We were on option 3. We were asked what are questions that we have about option 3. 3 of us talked about the need for consumer surveys. Don't assume that that's the preferred option, at least for me. It was the option we were talking about. So Peter, I would ask you to not assume that that's the one I want. We're going one by one, delving into each one, getting deeper questions about each one. And that's the process. I don't think we're picking and choosing today.
Mr. Momro.
Several times this evening, the comment has been made that we're going to consult with counsel about essentially challenging the state law. If we're going to consult with counsel, it ought not to be with the general attorney or the town attorney. It ought to be with a highly experienced constitutional law.
Okay, going back to, one of the purposes we were trying to accomplish tonight is going through these options, just general questions, observations, what additional information might be helpful to understand the impact, what new options or ideas or objectives people want. So I'd like to hear more of that. Ms. Davis.
One of the reasons that Magnets is even on our presentation is because we hope to accelerate student achievement as our first goal before we do anything else for the state or our building capacity. So my question is, if the magnets are successful, how would we use that knowledge, training, information, and expertise for the non-magnet schools?
I mean, there's a lot of answers to that. I think as we think about the phasing of this, if the board determines that going into magnets in a more intensive, extensive, and in a best practice mode, which would happen, we would look very much at one, how do you create a magnet that is highly effective? And then once it's proven to be effective, how do you translate best practices out to other schools? That is going on in the district already. There's a lot of cross-fertilization occurring from ISD as an IB school to the other elementary schools. We are reorganizing how we manage and hold accountable and support our schools into a network system to try and structure that very much so that be it New Lebanon as a magnet school, be it ISD as a magnet school, how can what's working there connect well into other schools? We're already doing this. We can build on that, but more than many in the community know, we are in the midst of literally reorganizing how we manage and support our schools and shaping into a network, which is, and simply put, is designed to do more of that sharing across it best practice.
Mr. Sherman.
Is this option to draw children let's take the western side of town, because that's a place that I guess we have a challenge. Is the purpose of this option, it's not clear here, and I'm sure it was done on purpose, was, you know, so we're not naming schools and lighting people up, and I get that part. Is the idea to draw children out of New Lebanon and Hamilton Avenue, or is it to draw children into either Hamilton Avenue and New Lebanon, as an example?
I can speak to that. We've had, as the board knows, this is a topic we've talked about a lot over the last 4 or 5 months. Best practice with magnets is you draw both ways. We don't do that here. We try and draw into the racially isolated area. You know, it's one of the first conversations you and I ever had, was if you wanted to have true magnets in this town, you incent it so people are going to move both ways. Second, you provide transportation. You don't do that. Anyone looking at what we do in Greenwich from a best practice, proven standpoint of effective magnets is you incent families to go in and out, and you provide transportation ahead of all that. You have a team that's ready to design and lead and organize a highly effective school, as we have at ISD. Again, I'm not advocating for this. I'm just providing the background on what would be a best practice magnet.
So does that mean we're talking about multiple magnets in a zone, or that's what I thought. So you in a zone, you couldn't have it both ways if you had it in one. Okay. I guess the other one is the zones. What problem was the idea of the zone, is the problem of the idea of the zone trying to address? Like, I think we know now, and we had a discussion with this at the board, is one of the things that didn't work in the current configuration is people were leaving New Lebanon district or attendance zones to go to Julian Curtis. I've heard people say anecdotally the reason people do that is so they can go to Central and Western. I hope that's not the case. But what's the idea behind the zoning? What does that do for us?
The idea was to balance overall enrollments by basically pairing schools that had smaller capacity with larger capacity, in order to, if you set your lottery up so that if the preference is that you stay within your zone, it would benefit you in overall enrollment balancing, because it's basically the alignment is schools that have increasing capacity with schools that have decreasing capacity, trying to balance that out.
I would add, it's also to provide to the board, again, a view of a mechanism that has worked elsewhere. You kind of look for what's on the list that you can turn to. Other communities have tried this and done this. So it's saying, here's a mechanism at the thought level to work with. Does it feel right? Does it? Does the data support it? Does the market research support it?
We've seen in other communities where how you have your magnets established today with magnets in New Lev with the hopes of drawing in, and that would create equity and balance, where other communities have established it the same manner, and it has also not achieved the intended purpose. And also, just the irony of it is that they both had populations that, when you looked at how the attendance area was established, and the population grew in those respective areas to a degree where, you know, it's then now you have a magnet school which is in an overcrowded situation, which you really don't want. I think the superintendent said it best, where the draw isn't one way. Successful magnets have draws in numerous directions, and that's what you would need to make this program successful. Irregardless of how the zones are established and the schools are paired, you need that movement in both directions, and you would have to have the incentives there, the programming there, the transportation there, for people then to embrace the magnet and ensure that you have a theme or you have a program there that the community really wants, so to be able to have a thoughtful process on the design of it to ensure that it will work.
And I would encourage board members, as we look at that option, and the public as we look at that option, not to focus so much on specific schools, which one would be the magnet or which ones. I think the zones are probably set up to balance both the racial balance as well as the capacity issues. But those the other assumptions, all those assumptions can change. If a different building makes more sense, if a different pairing of buildings makes sense, that's something that can be modified, but this is the concept that we're talking about. Ms. Ospina.
I also think it's important to clarify that just because we're going to, if we end up going with something like this and that it's necessary to create a successful magnet, that doesn't mean that the schools that are not magnet cease to be important, cease to be a priority, that we won't worry about their achievement. I think the idea is to make every school, help every child in every single school have the right program to achieve their potential. And the magnet idea is not so that only these kids get something better. It's more so that we can, it's almost like a prize for sacrificing a neighborhood school. So if we have an international school, let's say a bilingual school in North Street, or maybe a family in Hamilton Avenue would leave, not because they think, oh, in Hamilton Avenue my kid is not going to get an education, but they would say, that would be a great asset for my child to be bilingual. Same thing for someone in Old Greenwich. Maybe they would also like to have their child be bilingual and would say, I will trek all the way up to North Street. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. We're not going to make magnet school better, higher achievers. It would be just a different type of school, but each single school, each single student is going to get the attention that they need to achieve.
What I'd like to do is if we could make some comments on the last option or other options that board members would like to see. We think we have 72 people signed up to speak to us. Maybe some has left already and been bored by our conversation, I don't know. But we will, Mr. Anderson. Ms. Dane.
Just quickly on option 4, is it possible to take the grade reconfiguration and slightly adjust it so that we're covering pre-K and kindergarten as the grades that would be grouped together? Would the data support grouping pre-K and K to achieve racial balance?
It's something that we can look at and for the next meeting come back and talk about. I like, that option to me is the one that's least developed, I guess maybe more in my mind, that I don't understand it quite as well. I think there are a lot more variables there. You know, we have paired it with full magnet and then still have grade reorganization. I'd just like to understand more about that model as opposed to just grade reorganization or and different ways of doing grade reorganization. And again, that could be something that we can respond to next time. Ms. O'Neill.
I wondered if there was a better way of pairing New Lev with a school that would require, if this was something that we were seriously going to look at Parkway and New Lev are the extremes. And having taught at both those schools at the same time, it's quite a hike from one part of town to the other. So I just wondered about these pairings, if they were done just for numbers, or was there another rationale behind it?
They were done on numbers, and this does rely on the full magnets being in these pairings as well, so that really Parkway and New Lev are also with Glenville. So the option would be either stay in your neighborhood school at pre-K 2 or go to Glenville and be there through 5.
Mr. Chair.
I'd like to take kindergarten, because there's 150 kids. And anyway, I'm not going to get it. There's 150 kids. We can put them anywhere. We can place it anywhere we want in the, I'm sorry, pre-K. What did I say, kindergarten? Wow, okay, that's wrong. Scratch that. Pre-K, preschool. I guess I used to call them preschool. And we can place those anywhere in the district. The other one is, of course, we have 72 tuition-paying kids in the district. And we can put those anywhere we want in the district as well. I think before we talk about changing attendance zones, talking about big investments in magnets, whether they work or they don't, I think we should have those two tools in our tool bag, and we should use them if that's what we're going to use to satiate the state. I think we should look at using those as opposed to in some of this data where they've been placed right now.
What we cannot forget is that, for example, New Lebanon is overcrowded. So we still have to address that, and there's other schools, whether you believe the data or not, there are other schools that are, you know, Hamilton Avenue, I think it's on the verge of being overcrowded. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we think about next steps. I know that for the racial balance, we do have some time, but Leslie has promised New Lebanon parents that they would only...
I can't promise alone.
I said at another meeting that for the board, it's really important that New Lebanon only have one more year in the situation that they're in. So, the other thing I wanted to ask M&M, we are not the only district that has had to address racial imbalance, and I think it would be interesting to know what other districts have done, because maybe there's something that's not here that they have done that has worked, and you know, that would be other things for us to consider so we don't reinvent the wheel.
We can get that information for next time. There's one other scenario which isn't on here, and it would give us a background to better understand the enrollment projections, and that is what would we, looking more specifically at what we need to do to just deal with enrollment if that were our only issue in front of us. Okay, is there anything else we want to address tonight? Peter, or Nancy, sorry.
I would very much be in favor of looking at just the facility utilization scenario, and also what Jen stated before, a pre-K pairing. I think that would be really interesting to look at. Going back to the last option though, what's of concern is the high disruption factor in this, and that would carry through to the middle schools as well, which I think more information needs to be provided when we're looking at this option on what happens at the middle school level. But something that is attractive about this option is what you said earlier about it's a larger district, so there's much more stability, and you know, nobody wants to keep doing this over and over again because it's painful for all of us. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Mr. Van Braun.
When will we be permitted to submit other options?
I've been, you can identify them this evening, or we can, or you can submit them to me after this meeting.
Yeah, Leslie, I guess I got the same question, which is where are we going to go from here? Because I know we only got this 48 hours ago, and I like to think I'm a pretty good digester of stuff, but I think I need a little more brain power on it. So how do we
All right,
where do we go from
where do we
here?
go from here? We have, our next board meeting is in 2 weeks from now. What I was hoping to accomplish is, one, to continue to move forward on the confidence data with the enrollment so that board members would get additional questions or data requests to me within the next couple of days that we can then turn it around to have some more conversation about that at the next meeting. Regarding the options, I think on the 20th, it would be best to be able to eliminate any option that board members don't support based on what we've heard tonight, what we're going to hear later this evening, as well as the forums, and then to try and refine the universe of options that we want to move forward with to explore, while we are also doing our other to-do list, which is talking to council and some of the residency data.
So do we...
Clear as mud?
Well, maybe I can avoid it. So one action is what do you think about these and additional questions related to these so you get more detail about what they are. I can tell you right now, with the one that came with the little 4x3 map, I'd love to get that a little bit bigger. My eyes are not that good. And then I guess the second thing I'm hearing you say is if you have some other option, some configuration of this or something that isn't really here, we should pull that together and submit it to you so we can talk about it on the 20th or wait for the 20th or?
Yeah, submit it to me so we can do ask for some background work to be done on it and then talk about it on the 20th.
Perfect.
And again, these options, don't focus on the specific school or the specific zone. I mean, if you want some clarification, fine, but they're the ideas of how to address it. Okay, so with that,
just to bring us back to the process, I think what give clarity is the material is out, the board had it a day or so ahead, the community now has it. We're going into an intensive week or two of feedback and discussion. I've heard very clearly the superintendent, the board chair say on the 20th, it's a sense of direction. And so it may be at that point to say the sense of direction is none of these options work, here's some others that have to be dug into. Part of that may be to go charge the superintendent with a very intense conversation with the state about where the community is on this, where the board is. The sense of direction is not necessarily saying, as I've heard it, here's the one option to go pursue. But so additional options should be coming in from board members. If we can't resolve the analysis by the 20th, I think it's quite fair to say that is then to continue out. I've heard it. So I think there's clarity here. It's the chance now to be giving critique, feedback, and multiple options in. And then not pin ourselves to a timeline on a particular decision. And as I've done since I got here, be in constant conversation with the state about where we are.
Also part of this process is the community. We have 72 speakers, so perhaps one of those speakers has studied and can come up with ideas. So that's also important for the community to know that it's not just what other options can the board think about, but there's only 8 of us, there's hundreds of you. So I think that's also important that you know that from now until the 20th, there's time to bring up your ideas and get them to Leslie so that my group, M&M, can also help develop those.
Leslie, can I make one other information request? Is it possible we could actually get for each school, because this is important, I think, as part of the data set, maybe you guys have already seen it, how many children, incoming kindergartners, are already applied to enroll for next year? I realize we'll get more over the summer, but it would be a great data point to know what that data is and how it compares to your projections. Maybe you've already done that, but I would love to see it. If that's possible.
Yeah, we can get that. So with that, let's move to the public hearing. Let me give a little guidelines. We normally keep to 3 minutes per speaker. I think we won't make a motion to cut that, but please, if you can keep your comments to the point, since there are a lot of people that would like to speak, that would be helpful. If someone else has made your comment, you can just come up and say, I agree with that speaker, that would be helpful. And we're going to go for a while and see. Our agenda says that we can cut it off after an hour and then move it to the end of the meeting. I prefer not to have to do that, but hopefully that we can get this accomplished in the right amount of time. I'd like to also ask that all speakers use good judgment in terms of civility and respect as we work through this process, because we're trying to do this together. So thank you.
The audience has been sitting here for 2.5 hours. Can I make a motion that we suspend the 1 hour cutoff and we just get all the speakers up and get them done?
You want to make a motion and vote on it, or do you want to just, let's
get it
just
out.
keep going?
Let's do it right now and get it done. So my motion is we suspend the 1 hour public hearing. It goes as long as it needs to go.
All those in favor? missing Mr. Chair, so that's 7-0. Okay. With that, the first speaker is Peter Tessin. Use the microphone.
Good evening, Chairman Moriarty, Superintendent, board members. First, I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you for doing the hard work in terms of grappling with probably the most significant issue that faced the town in some time. Issue relating to our most fundamental and precious resource, our children, and also our property values, because I think the two are intertwined. Clearly, the issues that you have laid out are clear in terms of the ones that are locally based, which relate to residency verification and to space utilization. I just want to, tonight, speaking somewhat in a bifurcated role as the town's chief elected official, but also as a parent of a kindergartner in the system, say that as first selectman, I certainly want to publicly state that the town administration stands ready to support you in terms of addressing the issue of residency verification. We've had some good conversations with the school superintendent and members of the board, but where we can take town information, whether it be beach card lists, whether it be motor vehicle lists in the assessor's office, but collaborate to see how we can instill a greater degree of confidence in our public, in the parents, that we are making sure that the students who are going to our schools truly live in the district. So we have my commitment. Number two, in terms of space, I think that's something that we have the ability to address locally, and I've heard a number of you mention that. Again, if resources are necessary for that, I think the case can be made and we could convince those who have the funding authority to apply the resources to address that. With regard to the third issue that relates to the racial imbalance, I think clearly there is a considerable amount of frustration with the state of Connecticut in a whole host of areas, notably this one, because it's imposing something really against our will. And I would certainly support, as we've talked about internally, any type of assessment of that law in terms of its constitutionality, and again, applying town resources to it. The outcome that has been discussed, the state is going to look at outcomes, and I think the one thing that, and now I'm speaking more as a parent, is that we're going to go through this whole exercise to satisfy their requirements, and I deduct from it we're going to essentially be taking the kids and we're going to be scrambling them together, okay? And so we have performance data from the existing districts, and some are higher performing, some are lower performing. Is there a hope, is there a goal to essentially equalize the performance outcome in addition to equalizing the racial and ethnic? That, in a sense, denies a true education to the student, because you're not going to really know performance. It's all going to be mush. It's all going to just be thrown into one big pot. And again, speaking personally, I'm the fifth generation of my family to come to live in Greenwich. I don't know if the first ones went to school here. They probably didn't get past 5th grade. But my parents certainly did, and they went to Hamilton Avenue. At that time, predominantly an Italian neighborhood, and, the people turned out fine. They excelled. But it just, there's something fundamentally wrong with this. And I think, the state of Connecticut has a slogan that we're still revolutionary. That's what they're marketing us as in the state of Connecticut. Well, I think it does require us to be a little bit revolutionary in challenging this, because we are going to wind up destroying the fundamental basis of this town by diluting neighborhoods. get up here and make these remarks. It's much harder to actually come up with a solution. But I will commit to you, I will do what I can in terms of utilizing the town administration's resources to assist you. And also, as I've talked with people throughout the community who've come up to me, we have a wealth of talent, and I think we can draw upon the talent of our citizens. I talk about it regularly. We've got very bright people who come to this town because we are Greenwich. We have great schools, neighborhood schools. Let's draw upon the talent to assist us and help us be constructive in coming up with a solution for this.
Savitz, and after that, if Kim Blank can be ready.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Beth Savitz, Greenwich PTA Council President. Thank you to the Board of Education for this opportunity to comment and for the larger venue. Many thanks to Greenwich High School for hosting on short notice. The Council extends our gratitude to the administrators and support staff who are working unbelievably hard to facilitate all the extra meetings and communication surrounding facility utilization racial imbalance, including Kim Eves, Carol DeSalvo, Linda Valentine, and I am sure many others. Our Council has not had sufficient time to evaluate the new report. Members are still waiting for backup detail we previously requested on the May 23rd report, and many remain uncomfortable with the data. Initial reaction to the new information is dissatisfaction with these options and the lack of alternatives, especially intriguing ideas proposed by parents that are not included. Months were spent by the consultant not consulting with families, and now they would like time to be heard. Public meetings are no substitute for community-wide surveys, focus groups, and in-depth discussions with all constituents. Council members are witnessing widespread fear and anger, the reaction we predicted with an end-of-year timetable. PTAs have been doing their best to assist dissemination of accurate information. PTA Council is struggling to prevent a school versus school atmosphere, and your process does not help. Greenwich parents tend to prefer the school their child is in and value a neighborhood system. All our PTAs alike love their schools, yet differ in their satisfaction or frustration with the status quo. Several of them feel marginalized and targeted right now. Some PTAs are distressed by any redistricting prospect. Some are impatient for action to alleviate overcrowding. Some are frustrated by schools being ranked using CMT or SBAC scores which cannot test vision of the graduate or achieve the whole GPS mission. Some are all three. Affection for a school and reluctance to leave it are not equivalent to accepting its socioeconomic mix or level of service. Acknowledging a district problem is not the same as consenting to jeopardize your family's well-being. Ultimately, PTA Council questions the wisdom of inextricably linking facility utilization with racial imbalance, without analysis to show this produces superior solutions. Regarding other agenda items, our Council notes that the TEPL-C transition still lacks adequate parent and student input, whether into the process or into teacher evaluations themselves. The SEED Parent Survey Question Bank has fantastic sample questions for a feedback mechanism. Why not have teacher goals pertain to personalized responses rather than the distantly related school rating? And while PTA Council appreciates the budget limitations directive for a long-term facilities vision, we are looking for a component to address optimum educational environments, including aesthetics. Our newly renovated schools' populations interact differently with appropriate lighting and space and curb appeal. Please don't ignore that avenue to improve outcomes simply because a building is structurally sound. In our last remarks, I mentioned the Oklahoma PTA Disaster Relief Fund. All Greenwich PTAs now have the details on how to contribute to programs for the children who were victims of the recent tornadoes, which destroyed 2 elementary schools and a middle school, all 3 members of our national PTA family. Again, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Kim Blank, and this is Marcy Brazelton. We're co-presidents of the PTA in North Street School. I want to preface my remarks by saying that we haven't discussed these proposals yet as a PTA, so please take these comments as our own until we have a chance to talk about it with parents and come back to you with further comments. That being said, tonight's proposals will have a major impact on North Street. Both options 3 and 4 require the district to reassign some current families to other schools, effectively redistricting our school. Given that North Street is one of the schools that is under capacity, it seems nonsensical that we are faced with the threat that existing families will be forced out of a school where there are plenty of spaces for them. Without debating the merits of each proposal, I want to observe that on the whole, these are very radical approaches. It all seems like too much too soon. Are we really at a point where this is absolutely necessary, or can we start with a more gradual and incremental approach? To use a medical analogy, it seems that you're immediately jumping to surgery before trying all other less invasive treatments first. Why not start by trying some more limited solutions and see how far they get us? For example, we could begin with a limited choice plan that offers spots in undercapacity schools to students in overcrowded or racially imbalanced schools. At the same time, we can add magnet programs in undercapacity schools in order to attract more students to them. We can do this initially by only offering magnet spaces that take us up to capacity in these schools, enabling families to remain in their zone schools if they wish. This is how the military does it. Instead of starting with the draft, we start with a voluntary approach and see how far this gets. I also urge you to work to minimize disruptions when implementing any changes. We can make this whole experience less wrenching by phasing in any changes and grandfathering existing families. We're really worried that we don't have the bandwidth as a district to deal with such radical changes right now. The coming year brings the SBAC, the core curriculum, SEED, a new digital learning plan, a new math curriculum, and a $40 million building at the high school. These new initiatives are all good things, they're pressing needs, and hopefully all of them will have a positive impact on student achievement.
30 seconds.
In contrast, tonight's radical proposals do not seem as pressing and are not aimed at improving student achievement, which should always be the guiding principle. At best, these plans will have a neutral effect on student achievement, but more likely we will see setbacks as a result of district-wide disruptions and distractions. The key point for us is that all of this seems to be overkill to deal with the current situation. In fact, I know of only one case.
We'll come down to either Mike, and then speaker after that to be ready, Adriana Almeida.
I'm Laura Costin, I'm a Glenville parent. Throughout the presentation, I heard consultants talk about our building as one of the reasons why we might have grown so much as a school community. But long before there was a new school, we bought and paid for Glenville, and I feel like there should be the golden, you get what you pay for, and we want our neighborhood school. I don't know about anybody else, but developing a terrific magnet school program takes years. I don't know how that could possibly be implemented within the time allowed by the state or within our own time frame, because I'm certainly not going to volunteer to send my child to a school that is underperforming as it is now, with sending our kids to New Lev. Not to offend anybody at New Lev, but if you're going by test scores, it is an underperforming school. Sorry if that offends. So I also want to say, I do hope that you will revisit the legality of this law, because the 2007 Supreme Court decision seems quite clear that it is unconstitutional. Thank you.
Ken Badonsky.
I will be quick tonight because a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. But one of the things that, as I listened to all the options that were proposed, that to me is the best option, but no one actually came out and said it, is to do nothing. I don't know what the motivation is to really press all this very quickly on the community. There doesn't seem to have been enough vetting. I don't know what the deadline, why October is so important. I have my suspicions. But I just think doing nothing should be considered as the top option.
Ken Residency, followed by Mark Elliott.
Ken Residency from Riverside. As a reality check, I have two questions. The first is, when was the last time Riverside School's enrollment was 350 students? The second question I'd like to ask is, when is the last time Riverside School in its 80-year history has experienced a 130 student drop in enrollment over a 4-year period? Third question that I have is, when I spoke at last week's meeting, I raised the question of what data the consultants were using in terms of preschool feeder tracking. Dr. McCursey made the comment at the meeting that they did not rely on the so-called door-to-door method because that was inaccurate, that they instead relied on state data. When I look at the slide 7 of their presentation this evening, and I see what are the 3 building blocks of their data, the only thing that I see is state libraries. I see nothing at all about preschool enrollment. So what I would strongly encourage the board to do is, as you question the data and the assumptions that are used by your consultants, that you encourage them to visit and talk to the directors at our local preschool. I'm the junior warden of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Riverside. We have a preschool program that serves 128 children aged 2 through 5 in the heart of Riverside. These consultants have no concrete data at all about our students. Our director could very easily say who lives in what neighborhood, who is planning on going to school at age 5, who is planning on going to school at age 6. I would think that kind of data would be demographic gold for your consultants. And it's troubling to me that absolutely no effort's been made to reach out to the community and develop this kind of data before you rely on projections for making your decisions. Finally, the last point that I'll make is the point that I made at last week's meeting, which is, I think, irregardless of the sense of direction or consensus or even final recommendation that's made by this board, I do not think that any action should be taken by this board until after the election in November and the voters of Greenwich have the choice for their voice to be heard at the ballot box for who they want to represent us.
Hello, I'm Mark Alia. I'm a local Greenwich person who lived here since 1982 on and off, and I'm currently the father of 3 kids. I think we live in Western School, but we'll see how it goes. I think a lot of what's troubling to me is that we're conflating 3 very different issues, right? We've got racial imbalance, facility utilization, and achievement. And we conflate those, it strikes me, in part because we can address them with the same blunt instrument. We hire a bunch of consultants and they redraw maps and move kids around. And so at the macro level, having done so, the data will reflect, some normalization of some of the quantitative anomalies that we're worried about. But at the end of the day, those plans, well, certainly the data and the plans that follow from the data are totally impoverished of the thing that brought me back to Greenwich from New York, which is the choice to participate in the community. A lot of us don't resemble, I don't think, the data that are presented whereby, someone's born into a district and that's what's going to determine the capacity in the district. I, for example, had 1 child who was born in New York, 2 were born in Julian Curtis. We all now live, I think, in North Street. And that is very, very representative of my cohort, which are parents of young kids about to go into K through 5. So I'm left wondering, I'm relieved actually that we're hearing that maybe we're not just going to kind of do this because the state tells us. That makes me happy, and I think that makes my fellow parents happy. But more than that, I hope that if we're motivated to address these issues, the single paramount consideration is the retention of choice. We've chosen to live in these communities, right? We've done so and we've voted with our dollars and our feet. And it's really disturbing to sort of have architected back on top of you a redistricting or a wholesale change to the system. I mean, these things happen, but to the degree that it can be avoided at all costs, I would suggest to the board that you avoid that.
To be followed by Alexandra Ardega. Sorry if I messed up that name.
Hi, I'm Damien. I'd just like to reiterate the neighbourhood theme that's going here. Some of these redistrict things that are floating around, there was a plan that had myself and my children who are 200 yards from the school now being bused to a different school. I moved to my neighbourhood because I really like my neighbourhood and really value my school. And I feel like I'm not the only one here who's in that same boat who does value that. And I also want to say a lot of talk happened tonight about surveys. I guarantee you, if you need people to go door to door and do surveys in towns, there's probably 70 volunteers here who would be more than welcome and happy to do that for you or help out.
Thank you. Alexander Herdega, followed by Andrew Glass.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sure we've heard everything, and I would be able to talk like for tomorrow, but I'm just going to sum it all up like this. We've seen many graphs, many numbers, lots of talking. I have one simple suggestion. Let's have people vote. Let's have, in each school, let's have people vote. Let's do all the mumbo jumbo propositions with the last one, which one of the fathers proposed, which is let's do nothing. And let's see what happens then. And should it come to legislation, those votes should count for something. Thank you.
Good evening. I've heard a lot of great ideas tonight. I don't have any new ones to add, unfortunately. I am very encouraged by your desire to revisit the constitutionality of the case. I think it's very important, and the idea that if we can unshackle our options and our choices from the racial balancing law to find that's the best solution, as opposed to one that puts certain numbers in certain places, that would be the long-term community-supported solution, as opposed to one that just makes the numbers work. So thank you for revisiting that.
After Elizabeth Strohe, Ben Bianco.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate the difficulty of the situation, as I think most people do. What I am taking away and what I still don't understand and don't appreciate is the timeline that's been set in place. So we now heard amongst the board members, you have 2 weeks to submit a new idea, and that's it. And then we're going to try to narrow it down to an idea. Not that it's getting voted on, but we all know how the process works. Once you narrow it down to one, the board will mull over one, and that is the one you're going to vote on. And it may get voted out and nothing may happen, but you are asking your board now with data that you received 2 days ago, we received this morning, and you're asking the town to submit their ideas for discussion to narrow to one by the 20th.
Just for clarification, we're not narrowing it to one. It's just to get the ideas on the table.
It seems
and
like
we'll keep as many ideas on the table as necessary.
Which is great, and I think what the discussion this evening has been fantastic. The other concern I just like to say is, if all of us could determine the ebbs and flows in population, we all wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be on a beautiful yacht in some ocean. Nobody can determine that, and the problem you have is twofold. You have the racial issue, and you have the facility usage issue. And I can't remember who mentioned it, but have the consultants take their report, divide it into, look at what the racial issue is, look at what your facility usage is. Because the racial issue, we can take time. I think Dr. McCursey presented that the state needs a July report. This is progress. You've made progress. The state will be pacified. The state doesn't move that fast. We all know that too. Take this and say we are working our darndest to get racial balance in this town. But you have a facility issue. You have overcrowding in some schools. Then take your time, not next year, to drill down the data and see where you're at. As long as you marry these two issues, you are never going to come up with a good solution to satisfy your constituencies.
Ben Bianco, followed by Wayne Curtis.
Hi, Ben Bianco. I spoke last week. I have a law firm in New York City. I'm also licensed to practice law in this state. I agree with the father that just spoke before me. I'm very encouraged that you're revisiting the legality of it's actually a regulation, and that's why I stood up to make clear. You're not challenging state law, okay? Connecticut General Statute 10-226A through E is the law. There are regulations promulgated thereunder by the school board. That is where your 25% comes from. That's the mandate, up or down. It comes from the school board. So I just want to be clear. Challenging the law of the legislature, you're challenging Connecticut Agencies Regulation, Section 10-226E5, which I believe Mr. Chair quoted correctly, and even the superintendent, is that it is a strict 25 up or down based purely on race. That's what it is. It doesn't consider anything else. It is pure up and down. Last week, I quoted from the Supreme Court decision, and I did quote from the majority, but let me quote now from Richard Blumenthal, who, if he was on the Supreme Court, would have voted with the 4 dissenters. This is what he said in his February 21st, 2008 letter, and let's compare that to the regulation, not the law that promulgated the regulation. Let's compare exactly what he said. February 21st, 2008, it's available on the internet, it might even be in the report. According to the principles set forth in Parents-Involved decision, and using Justice Kennedy's analysis, which people love to quote because that created the plurality that defeated the majority, if you will. According to Justice Kennedy's concurring opinion, and using that as guidance going forward, the plans submitted by the local boards of education under Connecticut General Statute 10-226C cannot correct racial imbalance using school assignments based solely on an individual student's racial classification. That is precisely what the regulation demands and mandates that you do. And again, as the father before me said, if you can knock that out, I'm standing here trying to make your job easier. I really am. I know that doesn't sound right, but I'm doing that because if you can eliminate or at least lower the impact of that and say we are going to use race as a guideline, but we are not going to be forced to do the up and down 25%, then brings these things back in, brings a lot of these plans back into the fold and eliminates some of these crazy redistricting you have to do to get 30, 30, 30, 30 across the board in all these schools. Thank you.
Followed by Edward Parisa.
I just want to say that I agree with everybody who said anything about exploring the legal options, and I agree with everybody who's very interested in protecting the integrity of the town's neighborhoods in the education in the educational system we have here, which everybody values highly. And I appreciate the work you guys are doing on this issue. Thank you for setting this up. From my perspective, I'm just looking at what the goals are in terms of utilization, facilities, as well as racial balance, which are two of the overriding issues that the board has to address. It seemed to me that the plan was was not really achieving that, or at least the study that came out of the meeting on the 23rd. I didn't attend that meeting, but I did read the materials. Districts or areas or neighborhoods, I don't know if those little blocks, those numbered blocks are on the maps, they were being suggested in some of the redistricting plans that they were being moved into, out of low utilization school, should I call it district, and moved into very high utilization or overutilized, overcrowded schools, such as my district, which is currently, my neighborhood, which is currently in North Street, which is a low utilization school, is now being pushed over into a overcrowded school in North Miami, which, according to the board's projections or the consultant's projections, will reach 110% capacity. I see no logic in moving neighborhoods into overcrowded areas when they are coming out of underutilized schools to begin with. There's no logic to that. I question the board to examine any situation such as that. And I want to especially emphasize that those neighborhoods being moved between those two districts achieved none of the racial rebalancing goals that the board is trying to achieve. Both school districts are around 25% before, both are about 25% after. What's the point? I think there are quite a few things that you have to look at in this report and the options and ask whether they're achieving goals that you are trying to, that you're setting out as the whole impetus for this redistricting or any rejiggering of neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Edward Parisa next, followed by Alexandra Gillette.
Good evening, Edward Parisa, North Street School. I guess I'll be quick and simple. I've seen all these options. Not one addresses why we are here. Racial imbalance is really what is driving all of this. Option 1, I hear the same statement. Out of compliance. Option 2, out of compliance within what? 1, 2, 3 years? Options 3 and 4, please. I can't even begin to punch the holes in these things. I mean, I thought of the idea, and I'm so happy that the co-presidents of North Street PTA had come up with the idea. It's exactly what I was going to propose. Offer that option. I guess dragons think alike. As far as the legality, yes, I'm not going to beat this to the death. I've spoken to an attorney. His name is George Pratt. If we're interested, he's more than willing to take our case. Thank you.
Alexandra Gillette, followed by Despina Fasiliota. I guess Alexandra left is equal to speak.
Getting away from tracking, projections, data, trends, Malone and McBoom were brought in as consultants, precipitated by an attendance anomaly that placed the town of Greenwich not in compliance in 2 schools, New Lebanon and Hamilton Avenue. You've given us percentages. Can you tell me how many children are, in numbers, are from the 2 schools that put the school not in compliance? That's the first question. Do you see any other schools, or do you project that any of the schools are threatened not to be in compliance? If the 2 schools were in compliance, would the Board of Ed be required to rezone school districts at the present time?
Thank you. The next speaker is Carol Marinelli. And the speaker after that is Lisa Boots. So Carol Marinelli is not here. Lisa Boots, are you here? Laura Canio, sorry, can't read. Wendy Lederer. Atsumi Marsh. Christina we got one, okay. And then Christina McGlone, if you're here.
Hi, I'm Atsumi Marsh from the North Street School District. I think I would like to address the issue of racial imbalance, particularly in North Street. First, I think there is one more option, which is, I personally like to address the data which is used to determine race. I'm not sure when or where I checked off a box of the race of my children, but I do know that I am Asian, and the father of my children are white, and I personally would like a chance to help rebalance the racial imbalance of North Street. If this, I'm not sure where this data is coming from, and I'm not sure what I would check off, but I do know that being of Asian descent, I certainly am a minority parent. And when I go to North Street, I might, look there and see a very an imbalance, and it's going to mostly look very white, but I'd like to know where this, the race issue comes up, is a white Argentinian considered of Hispanic background? Are my children considered white? Is there a percentage? Is there a color coding system? And I think that's an important issue for me because I personally know that all my children's friends are of varied backgrounds, and there is no way to determine whether that school is racially imbalanced or not. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Christina McGlone from Riverside. I heard a lot of questions asking about the data and the validity of the projections. And one thing that I did is I looked at the Fairfield experience because they commissioned in 2009 and 2010 studies from 2 separate vendors, and they published them online. So from information I got from the Board of Education, I made a spreadsheet, and I have copies if you'd like one. But essentially, if you look, they have 11 elementary schools, and in 2 of the schools, there was 20% more enrollment than the 2 different studies project, and this is 09 and 010 versus today, so we're not talking about a long time ago. In one of the schools, they were over 15%, where the actual enrollment was less than what was projected. So my concern is that the vendor that Greenwich is using has predicted a sharp change and steep decline in enrollment in Riverside. And should the projections be off by 15 to 20%, as we saw with the Fairfield experience, Riverside will go from adequate utilization to being overcrowded. The other thing is, I want to echo what Mr. Scheer said. Specific to the Riverside analysis, the last few years, they're extrapolating these years and amplifying the trend. And there's a strong link between Riverside employment and the finance industry, where we've seen a cataclysmic event 5 years ago that paralyzed many households, slowed new construction and existing home sales. So I do think that we're looking at data that is anomalous, and we're making trends from that data. I think that alone should be enough to hold off the state, because it's very difficult to make decisions and radical changes that we're projecting using data where it's very obvious that we're talking about trying economic times that don't represent an underlying trends.
Followed by Sunny Dozier.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Barth. I'm a Riverside resident, parent of 3, 2 at Riverside School. One is 13 and not at Riverside any longer, but did go there until 5th grade. Fortunately, all of my bullet points you touched on in a very nice fashion. For that, I'm very appreciative. I also just wanted to thank Dr. McCursey very much for the goodwill that you began the meeting with. It makes me feel a lot better just about this entire process. I do have 6 things, very short things, that I wanted to throw out there for you to consider for the next meeting. The first one is that if we are going to use our consultant's data on enrollment, I just want to piggyback on what Leslie mentioned, that we should do some back testing on that data. I've looked at past enrollment data projections, and as we all know, they didn't turn out to be as accurate as we would like. Second, if possible, I would love to see some examples of examples out there in the public where we can see real success with redistricting. Unfortunately, when I Google that, I only get failures, and I would love to see some examples of where we've seen success. Thank you. Third, and I know you can't respond to this, but it's my impression that the Hamilton Avenue Magnet School has kind of fallen by the wayside for lack of funding. So I just would like some kind of, I don't know if it's a Board of Ed or a town guarantee, if you will, that if we do go the magnet school route, that we won't, in a year or 2 lose funding for those great ideas. Well, fourth, and this is kind of minor, but I would like more clarity on how this impacts middle schools. It's very unclear to me, and it matters very much, particularly since I have one student. Fifth, and this has to do with academic achievement and with regards to the state. Again, we've mentioned it's a numbers game, and they're just looking at this 25% number, but as you guys get more involved with your conversations with the state, I would just like to talk about our student achievement and how in Greenwich, our student achievement, at least in my opinion, is best enhanced by tailoring each individual school to meet its in particular very specific needs. And last but not least, although I do feel strongly it's a Board of Ed mandate to challenge legally the state on this, I would like to know as a parent how we can be involved. I'm happy to write letters, I'm happy to email, I'm happy to petition, but if you could give me that feedback, and I'm happy to get as many people involved in that effort as well, but however we can support you there. And last but not least, I would just close with, You know, I came into this a little cynical tonight, and I'm very pleased. I have a lot more confidence that the process is a lot more open than I felt like it was. So I want to thank you all for that clarity, and I look forward to the next meeting.
Karen Hirsch, Anne Marie Lewis after Karen.
Members of the board, Superintendent McCursey, my name is Karen Hirsch. I'm the current president of the Glenville PTA. With me are Anne Marie Bulis, the incoming president, and Rosemary Thibault, the outgoing president. As you're well aware, we're here to address the options to solve the issues facing our district. We're disappointed that we were given an insufficient amount of time to research and plan, each plan being presented tonight, or work towards any other possible solutions to present to you. It was provided to us 12 hours ago, and we're disappointed that the district did not present the document to all the stakeholders at the same time. Despite this fact, Glenville Elementary School comes to you as a united front to vehemently oppose your redistricting plans, which seem to have the most severe impact on our school. The plan states that redistricting affects between 800 to 900 students, but nowhere does it make clear what percentage of those students are from Glenville. But it is clear to us that we are a targeted majority. These plans certainly look like they are sacrificing our children for the sake of the balance. Even in the magnet options, specifically number 4, making Glenville a full magnet, there is no discussion as to where our current families will go. After having to fight for a new school and having our community separated to numerous different schools for 2 years, we've spent the last 3.5 of those working very hard to create a sense of community and truly be a neighborhood school. Please do not destroy all that we have worked to create. Ambiguous nature of your data. As we as a community are in a unique situation to know that the data provided by the district should not always be trusted. When we fought to have our school rebuilt, we fought to increase the number of available classroom sections. However, those requests were denied based on data that stated we would never reach historical statistics of past student population, and in 4 short years we have shown you that that proposed data does not adequately address the needs and desires of the families of Greenwich. To Glenville, they were using their best guess and likened it to picking the winning Powerball numbers. We know that if we built an attractive school, people would come, and now we are facing the potential of a space utilization issue. In order for us to provide you with some credible and workable options, we ask the following. What is the cost associated with each viable option, and what is the cost of determining those costs? What is the cost of non-compliance with racial balancing requirements? As you've heard from many parents tonight, as we are questioning why we are not challenging the state's insistence on complying with racial balance in our elementary schools, when our high school, which should be the only school being looked at, is racially balanced. We would like to know the risk of achievement. How do these options affect student performance? When Stanford was redistricted, and it appears that M&M may have been involved in that, we've heard over and over that the test scores at all of those schools have dropped, and there are no longer any attractive schools, as they're all mid-level performers. Again, with not enough time for due diligence, we cannot provide actual data for this, but all indications are that there was a very negative impact on students. We will not let go and move on. You may say that only 20% of students are impacted, but how can you ignore the impact of 100% of the student population due to the loss of their neighborhood schools, family, and friends with whom they attend? Greenwich is a town with an addition of neighborhood schools that will be lost. Most families have done their research and chosen to live in an area based on the school that their child would attend. What is the emotional impact on our students? Will grandfathering students and families be considered to lessen the emotional impact on our students? What about a phase-in program? Can that be considered? We've heard from our parent body that they have moved or decided to buy a home in Glenville specifically because of Glenville School. Our school was chosen by our community members with intent. There must be a simpler solution. Not one of your options seems to solve both space utilization and racial imbalance adequately. Each option suggests that we will face these same issues again in a few short years, and with the majority of change impacting one side of town versus the other, it is in the end that the students will bear the brunt of these options. Even with the short amount of time given to us, we have heard from a large majority of our school all crying out in one voice that these options are simply unacceptable. Thank you.
Tom Pastor, Melissa Demon, Mary Alice Schultz, signed up twice, Kelly Peck, and Lori Fields.
Hi, I'm Lori Fields, and I'm part of the Parkway District. I think there have been a lot of fantastic points made, and so I won't reiterate most of them because many of the issues I think have already been here. But I think I'll start by saying I think that Greenwich has amazing schools, that we are a fantastic district, and that people from all over come because they want to be a part of Greenwich schools. And I think what a lot of parents are concerned about, and I'm sure the board is as well, is doing anything that will destroy what an amazing community school-based system that we have. And we've heard also could negatively affect property values. So that said, I won't go through all the specific points that people have already brought up, although of course I do significantly support the idea of challenging the legality of what is potentially and probably an unconstitutional mandate from the state. But I'll say just specifically from a Parkway perspective, and this point was raised a little bit by Ms. O'Neill, option 4, which was to combine Parkway and New Lebanon as a sort of K to 2 and 3 to 5 option, it doesn't work. And I think probably most people here can understand why not. I mean, just the logistics of it are insane. And the idea that we would want to physically even deal with the transporting and the logistical nightmare of having children in multiple schools that are nowhere near each other, and having two such radically different communities coming together goes against everything that I think that our school system is looking to do. So I'll leave it at that. I think there are a lot more points that can be made, but it's very late.
Those are all the people we have signed up to speak. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? Joe Todd.
I'd like to thank the board for spending this. Hi, I'm Joe Todd from Riverside, and I really appreciate the board spending this time. This is my 3rd meeting that I've seen through, and I've learned something each and every time. I'd like to make 3 observations. For the board members who haven't been at the previous 2, I'll make an observation from each of those and then an observation about tonight. At the first board meeting at Central Middle School, I made the observation that we're relying an awful lot on consultants' data. And I was told, well, let's see what they present. I think we've seen what they presented. And I've drawn the conclusion, I spend my career dealing with numbers, that it is junk data. Very simply junk data. And if you don't have the sophistication around numbers and you'd like me to sit down with you, I'm happy to take you through it. Okay, that's point 1. Second point, at the meeting we had at Western Middle School, it became pretty clear that there were really 2 very different options. To do just what it takes to deal with the overutilization of 2 schools, or try to deal with the racial imbalance. And I asked the very specific question, will we hear tonight an idea that at least allows us to target the immediate concern that parents are struggling with overutilization without addressing racial imbalance? And I was said that we would hear that. I don't think we've heard that. So I would ask the full board to continue to impress upon the people that are running this process that we need to hear that. And then the third and last point that I'll make is, as somebody who deals frequently with boards, I gotta say I'm actually now very concerned for our school district. You are spending an awful lot of time, and it looks like you're going to continue to spend a lot of time, on something that is not going to improve student achievement in Greenwich. And so I would ask you, the board and the superintendent should be spending your time. And I hope you conclude it isn't. Because we got a lot of bigger issues in this town, which is how well do our kids read, and how well do they write, and how well do they do math, and are they prepared for college? And nothing from these last 3 meetings that I've heard is helping us really with the ultimate objective. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to address the board? Come on up to the mic and state your name.
Yes, John McDonald. I have children in ISD, in Eastern, and next year Greenwich High School. I'm going to swim upstream from the comments that a couple of other folks have made. Just about the constitutionality, I don't like the regulation. I think it's a terrible idea. I don't like that Darien, which is all white, doesn't have to deal with these issues, whereas Greenwich does. I don't see how we're racially imbalanced and they are not, but anyway. But this town, but when it comes to this town and constitutionality discussions and fighting the state on that, we don't have a good track record. I'm thinking of beach cards are for residents only 2.0 on this one. I don't like where it's going to go. I don't think we're going to win that one. Second of all, before this meeting, before I got the presentation, I thought redistricting was the only option. After I saw option 4, I gotta say, I liked it. I thought it had probably the only choice of doing something different, combining K2 and 3-5. I thought it had a lot of potential for doing something different educationally and actually improving student outcomes, as well as solving the other issues. So that's all. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Loretta Nolan. I live in Cos Cob and both of my children went to North Miami School. My issue is student achievement. I have had a child who was in the ALP program, and I know, at least my understanding is, I know Ms. O'Neill ran that program and I was very happy to get a letter from her back in the day. My understanding is that the cutoffs for that program are based on the educational assessment of each child in each school. And my concern is for the lower performing schools. If you take students and either draw them by magnet into higher performing schools, or do the opposite, which is to take higher performing students and draw them into the lower performing schools, that the students who now would qualify for ALP, say at New Lebanon, those students will not qualify. And we can talk all about data points and numbers and everything else. But if you talk to a mother who has children at New Lebanon, and her older child now qualifies for ALP, and her younger child doesn't qualify because he or she has been moved or you've moved other children in, you have irrevocably altered that child's life. So as you deliberate these issues, I want you to think about that child sitting in that school who doesn't have the money for SAT prep, doesn't have the money for tutor, or anything else, aside from all the other points that were made here tonight. We as a community have an obligation to educate all to their greatest ability. And when it comes time for college, because I have a junior right now, those applications are one child, and here's her performance, and here's her AP classes, and his or her achievements. And that is one child, one envelope, going to a college, and the child says thumbs up or thumbs down. And we have an obligation to every child.
Is there anyone else who wants to address the board? Okay. Since not, we'll close the public hearing and move on to our next order of business, which is not the same topic. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the 2014-15, discussion of revision to the teacher evaluation plan. Dr. Flanagan.
Good morning, excuse me, good evening.
Come over and sit here. Oh, I have to sit there.
The cabinet move over here front. No choice, please. If you may read it.
Good evening. Tonight is the first review of the revisions to TEPL. We made these revisions in order to comply with SEED, which is the System for Educator Evaluation and Development. Our goal this year in working with our TEPL 1 committee was to look at the core requirements of SEED from the State Department of Education and make sure that we comply with those core requirements while still maintaining the progress that we've made in teacher evaluation in Greenwich with the TEPL program. I think we should go right to questions.
Ms. Daly?
Okay, I have a question on the half of the student growth part of the assessment. So the half of the 45% that's not the state tests.
Right.
I was wondering if the committee considered research assignments, student portfolios, intricate math problems, instead of using another kind of a standardized assessment that's just a more localized one.
Our goal in doing this, especially this particular year, for not only for the student learning outcomes, but also for all of the components of SEED, was to try and keep it as simple as possible this first year. This is a significant change. For our district, less so than other districts who hadn't even used rubrics and things like that before. But what we tried to do is to make sure that we weren't creating more work for teachers just to comply with SEED. So what we really based this on was, what do we already have in existence as far as assessments in the district? And Mrs. Parisi and the program coordinators are actually working to create a bank of what assessments would be appropriate for that 22.5%, and also actually creating sample student learning outcomes, so that when they have to develop them, they can go to this bank, look and see what a good SLO in Greenwich would look like, and be able to either adopt that one at all different subject areas, all different levels, or to use that as an exemplar, then to move on to create their own. So that's what we're really hoping, is try and keep things as simple as possible, because it is a lot of change.
Just to follow up on that, so that means that the tests that the students take, they're not going to be standardized across the district. So if Johnny could get a very high grade in someone's class and not in the other, so there's not going to be a comparison across the district in these grade levels?
It has to be done by teacher, and what we're encouraging teachers to do, either at a grade level or at the secondary level who are teaching the same program, to make sure that we're encouraging them to choose the same, I was about to say slow, but it's student learning outcome, so that they can maximize the teamwork that would go around that assessment. But we're also encouraging them to use assessments that already exist. So just to give you an example, if the three of us are teaching 6th grade science at a middle school, we would try and make sure that we set the same, not necessarily the same student learning outcome, but certainly use the same type of an assessment. So we would be maximizing the strength of the team and working around that same, using that same assessment for a student learning outcome.
So it's not going to be standardized, so it's every school on their own, doing their own thing?
It's not on every school, it's every teacher. That's the way that the plan is drafted.
And that'll apply to K-1, 2 as well?
K-1, 2, yes. The only teachers who are exempted are pre-kindergarten, because the state hasn't determined what they would like as far as assessments of pre-kindergarten teachers. Teachers who are the guidance counselors that are currently in TEPL 2. So guidance counselors, school psychologists, speech and language, library media, and social workers. And coaches, because they don't have direct working with children, so they can't set student learning outcomes, and the state hasn't figured out how they'd like to assess the piece.
So Spina.
Why can't it be done? Because one of the concerns that I have, even at the high school already, where like the science teachers get together and do the same test, even for like the various sessions, and even sections, and even that sometimes is a problem. You hear kids that one particular teacher didn't really go over one section while another class did, and that thing happened to be in the exam. So in this case, where they're not even going to get together, the teachers of the same subject, is it going to create inequities, unfairness to the kids?
But it also allows, as far as using the same assessment, that would be something that the district would have to set as a goal in future, to have teachers who are teaching the same course or the same students to set a specific standard. I believe at the high school, the math teachers do have something like that, where they do common assessments. We certainly could move toward in that direction and have those conversations, and I know Mr. Winters has already started that conversation using SEED as kind of the impetus to say this is the time where we need to start to set some common assessments in departments at the secondary level. But the other thing that I would say is that part of what these student learning outcomes are supposed to be based on are the students that are sitting in front of you. So you want to make sure that the standard that's set is appropriate for growth depending on the students that are sitting in front of you, and that for instance, setting a CAPS goal for particular students if they're in AP Science or whether they are not in AP Science. You have to have the goal set on student growth, not necessarily on an arbitrary standard.
Okay, so they'll basically take the student, it will be a student compare against himself.
Right. It could be, the teachers could be looking at last year's cohort and saying we want to move this up. They could also be setting a standard based on a pre-assessment at the beginning of the school year and then doing an assessment at the end of the school year.
Can I ask, the administrators, I guess, are approving what standard the teacher accepts, so there's going to be oversight and continuity in how administrators are, what they're going to approve.
Absolutely. It's going to be discussion, making sure it's a rigorous standard, making sure it addresses what the state is calling a large portion of the students. I can't set a goal for 3 of my students, and I teach 120.
And is this going to be revisited next year when we don't want to keep it simple?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to revisit. We've had a standing Temple committee every single year since we started, just for these kinds of reasons. We also have to revisit it because the state is already making changes, and we haven't even implemented it yet. And the NEAC School of Education's report on SEED is not due out until January of 2014.
Ms. O'Neill.
So how do we evaluate the effectiveness of our curriculum if every school and possibly every teacher is using some different form of assessment?
The purpose of setting the student learning outcomes is not to evaluate the curriculum, it's to evaluate the teaching.
I know, but how do we evaluate that our curriculum is doing the job? It should be system-wide if everybody is being evaluated individually, so then when we do have these state tests, and we don't have any basis for making it a statement about our curriculum on the off years when we don't have state assessments, because everybody's doing something different.
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we do have built in
benchmarks.
Well, SBAC is going to pick up a big share of this, so the SBAC, that's tied to the Common Core, which is tied in a way to the curriculum all the way through. So that is numerically one definite piece of this. I think going forward, we can begin looking at ways to get that other assessment piece tied in. We do for sure have that 23.5%, whatever angle.
I'm going to try one more time, but my real focus is on K1 and 2. We don't have SBAC, and this is where we need to get those third graders reading on grade level. So it would seem to me that we want the very best data system-wide to know whether or not the reading program we're delivering is the best program we can for these kids. I will leave it at that.
Again, I'm confused. The purpose of this is to evaluate teacher effectiveness.
Teacher performance.
Teacher performance, teacher effectiveness, right? And we're expecting teachers to, we expect teachers to teach the Greenwich curriculum. which by the way is Bill pointed out, Common Core SBAC, current Connecticut State curriculum, CMT, doesn't matter, it's the same system, right? It's a well-defined curriculum that must be approved by the state, and there's a test. So that part I can take off the table. What I don't,
standardized test.
Yeah, that's about the student performance, and yes, it's an indicator of how well a teacher has taught the curriculum that we know whether we have the outcome with the student or we don't. What I don't understand at all is if that's what we want teachers doing consistently across the district, why are we letting them come up with their own assessment based upon what they're doing in the school? It's prescribed what they're supposed to be doing.
It's not that so they're setting 2 student learning outcomes, right? They teach, let's take a 4th grade teacher. Teacher's teaching science, social studies, math, reading. She's setting 2. One is going to be, if she's a 3rd grade teacher, she's setting a goal based on, she can choose reading based on the data. She's supposed to be looking at the data with her evaluator and determining what would be an appropriate goal for the students that are sitting before her in all those areas that she's teaching. She's going to set 2. She's not setting 1 in every single curriculum area. So what we're strongly encouraging is if the strategic improvement plan for that school is reading, then it would make sense for the teacher to be setting a goal for her particular students in reading, because that would contribute to the success of the entire school. So what she sits down is look at her assessment data, either if it's from the 2nd grade, the DRPs or something like that she has assessment data on, and sets a goal for those particular students. So depending on the students in my class, it could be a different goal, meaning a SMART goal, they have to write a SMART goal, depending on the students that are sitting there. They're still teaching the same curriculum. Irene could be my next door neighbor, in a different school, and they may have a focus on math. She's going to be setting a math goal. Another teacher may be saying, okay, in a different school, again, with evaluator oversight and input, that she's going to be concentrating on her students in 4th grade to get them ready for the 5th grade science assessment. So it's supposed to be individualized and differentiated based on the student needs that the teacher is teaching.
But doesn't that put us in a position, as Barbara was saying, which is in that system there's tremendous degrees of variability. It's totally dependent upon, you could also introduce how hard was the goal, which meant the in-building administrator, the strength of the in-building administrator to properly put together a performance assessment system. There's just a lot of variability in there, and I'm wondering, then we come out on the other side, and I don't know how to compare one school to the next. And maybe that's not the goal.
It's not, it's individual level data, it's teacher level analysis. It's not going to give us the information we need. It's not designed for that, for school level assessment.
That's what the
how will we know? I would think we would try to figure out who are our best teachers and who are the ones we need to help and support.
Yeah, we will figure that out through. I guess the important piece on that self-identified, it's not a random walk. It's not a teacher saying, hey, I want to pick this, I like it. It's done through a supervisory function. And what all of our schools have very definite school improvement plans that right now are very clearly tied into the 3 board goals. So this, Bill McCursey, I can't pick math and say, oh, I want to do it unless it's tied into the school improvement plan.
It has to be based on the student data.
Which is tied into district improvements. It's all tied in. So again, it's not a random pick. But again, trying to understand school level effectiveness, that becomes a different sort of issue. This is designed to get an individual teacher effectiveness.
And how well, this is one piece of how well a teacher does. Obviously the evaluations and the other components of SEED all aggregate up into a summative rating. So then as a board, you can look at the summative ratings, we have to report them to the state, of all of the teachers and how their ratings play out against other schools in the district or other schools in the state.
There will be a big step forward. That is, for the first time, we will have heavy quantitative data. We've not had that before. we will have heavy quantitative data per teacher for at least almost a quarter of their points, but that's the consistent. Then on top of that, it goes up to 45% of any teacher's score will be quantitative. We've not had that before, so that is a big step forward. Some would debate it, but if you try to understand individual teacher effects, that we now have a mix of qualitative and quantitative data.
And the qualitative data for the observation of teacher performance will also have a number, a value at the end. Teachers will be rated 4, 3, 2, or 1.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, it sounds like there's a disconnect. The question I'm hearing from board members is there a missed opportunity to further the district goals and achievement by using this other part of the teacher evaluation assessment?
And that I would say that would be a considerable amount of work to start to standardize an assessment across the district. Not impossible, but that would have to be a decision that you would want the board, the administration to take on that task of developing those types of assessments.
What is the progress on the K-1-2 assessments, which is something the board's talked about for at least a year or more?
I would need clarification. I can tell you that we have the kindergarten inventory that is a standardized assessment that we administer to the students, and that's with the State Department of Ed. We also use the Fountas and Pinnell assessment starting in kindergarten as well, so that too has been psychometrically proven and validated and reliable, and that is a standardized assessment.
Just to interrupt, what I think that the board, again, to put it in layman's terms, looking for measures in K1 and 2 that can help us determine where kids are and how we then get them to the skill level they need to be. How many kids are coming to us with the correct kindergarten readiness skills, and then who's got the reading readiness skills as they go forward. And I'm a non-educator, am I stating that correctly? But it's to assess both where our kids are and then also our effectiveness in moving kids forward. So in general, I don't think we've been specific to saying we want to develop X, Y, and Z by a certain time, but the board's been talking about this for a long time, and I guess we're veering off into a different topic at a very late hour, so maybe we'll have to...
Let's do this. Let's take this as a charge from the board to then be very clear back on what do we have as assessment at the K-1 to 2 level, and come back with that. If we have further time to do that, we certainly else is upon us, but I think it's clear. I think we actually have it at this late hour. I think we're losing the clarity of the answer we actually do have, because I think actually our newest leader in this realm has just told us something very important information in terms of we do have what we're already using systematically. So I think we can come back to that and look at that. I would, in this late hour, though, make one very important point. I have not seen a school improvement plan that is not rooted in the 3 core goals, other than the high school, which doesn't have a core goal. So I think the board can be very assured that if in the supervisory function, the picking of that additional target, it's tied to the school improvement plan, it is going to be tied right into one of the 3 core goals.
I think there's one other area of concern on these changes, and Nancy, do you want to?
I just thought there might be an opportunity to, in the parent feedback and also the student feedback sections, to do something in addition to the Harris survey, some type of across the board input from parents and also from students. And I think when we were doing the success system, revising that a year or so ago, we were looking at some standardized tests that test for whole student development or 21st century skills. And I was wondering if they could be useful in this section.
The parents' feedback piece, the state is very clear about that they do not want individual teacher ratings. They want it as a whole school aggregate to determine focus areas for parent engagement. You know, the Temple One committee thought we were doing a great job in that we were so much far ahead of other districts in actually utilizing the parent survey, the Harris survey data which the board has brought, to our attention for 4 years, or not 4 years, 8 years, for administrations of the survey in the declining responses or unhappiness in the in the teachers' feedback on individual student progress. So we thought this was a great opportunity to use the Paris survey, which is validated. It's not, can be influenced by teachers. It can be, and we have longitudinal data on it. We thought it was a great opportunity to utilize that data as a focus for schools to use their individual data at the school level to determine a parent focus for engagement. As far as student surveys go, if the board is at a point where they would like to have student surveys done, I think we should follow the same thing that we do with Harris, that we should hire a company to come in and do, there's lots of them out there, and they would do really great surveys. I've seen presentations by different places where they do surveys at different levels, even including, they might go as low as 5th grade, and I believe the state doesn't want you to do it lower than 5th grade, where they do surveys of students to get individual feedback on teachers.
Ellen, sorry, can I just follow on? If you can also address, I know there are standard nationally administered tests for 21st century skills, and I had another question I'm going to throw in there. I saw that the state has, the state education budget has actually gone in a good direction for schools very, very recently, and I know there's funding for SEED now. I don't know if we're eligible for any of it, so that we can perhaps try some of these things. And I'm surprised that the state would let you go to 5th grade, but I was thinking the secondary level for student input.
Ms. Osby.
I have a question and a comment. The comment, I know we haven't voted or anything, but at least personally, I would encourage us to pursue student evaluation of teachers at the high school. I think it would be, if you're a teacher, you always want to do better. And sometimes the students, not sometimes, most of the time, the students, as Peter from Brown would love to say, are the consumers. So I think it would be very good for the teachers to get that feedback. My question is the parent feedback. You said that the state doesn't want individual feedback on a teacher. So how useful is it going to be like the Harris survey, which is just about like the parents that answer about the school, and then how useful is that?
What happens is each school, the way that the process that's delineated by the state is that you would, if you didn't have the Harris survey, you would conduct a whole school survey of parents, asking for information about and using that data for a parent engagement goal. So using the Harris survey, we already have that. Schools with their school data team would look at the surveys for their individual school and choose a focus for parent engagement. A lot of the schools I'm sure will use, because it's the #1 issue, parent feedback, teacher feedback on individuals' student progress. The individual teachers now, in that school, will then have to set a goal, okay, of how they're going to contribute to the overall improvement of the whole school survey on that. So I might, the 3 of us are 3rd grade teachers, we might say, we're going to contact our parents once a trimester to have a 15-minute conversation with them in addition to the normal parent-teacher conferences on their individual student progress. That's a goal. Then at the end of the year, the administrator has to determine whether, and the teacher has to prove that they've met that goal, exceeded it, or failed to meet it.
I promise my last comment, but about teacher, parent evaluation of teachers, I think before we consider that, we ought to do a little research on it, because at the college level it is a very mixed bag in terms of creating grade inflation and all sorts of other issues. So I think we best read a little up on that subject before we decide to go down a certain path.
We actually did too. The committee, we had several articles on it at the college.
Next steps on this is going to come back to us in 2 weeks. I believe there's still some questions out there about the half of the student growth assessment. So I think board members, if you have concerns over the proposal, I'd like you to submit your comments to Bill and to me very quickly, so that if there are any changes that need to be considered, that the administration has time to do that. I think the parent question was answered if the state's saying, no, you can't do it. But I think it's a missed opportunity. And the student piece is really secondary. It's not part of this because we're not using student feedback, we're using the alternate measure. So it looks like assessment was where people had concerns. Send in your questions. This is coming back to us in 2 weeks. Thank you. Okay, next item is the discussion of the 2014-15 budget limitations. For lack of creativity, are following the similar process to what we've done in the past, and that is to identify the broad outlines of the business approach to the creation of the budget, including what the district should consider and should not fail to consider as they develop a budget. The document is similar to what we've seen in previous years, but it does reflect changes of issues that the board's addressed this year. Number one, it reflects the current strategic planning process and those documents and information that's presented there. Secondly, it includes the suggested revisions to the budget book that were developed last year, And then on the capital side, it talks about providing data on our capital plan and on individual programs and individual buildings, so we'll get a better sense of what that capital, our strategy for our capital spending is, which is, well, we think we know what it is. Clearly other people looking at our documents can't figure it out. But that's where we are. I think that some board members had some suggestions of maybe adding to this to saying specific comments of the budget book should include X, Y, and Z, which would add to this, but we can solicit those comments, but let's have some discussion over this document now. Specific comments?
I think it's absolutely fine as is. I have no comments on it.
Ms. Gale, I can't see hands in a straight line here, so.
I had a couple comments. I was wondering in the capital section if we needed to be explicit about technology from a capital standpoint. And I also, given the new strategic plan document, the document we're going to review tonight a little bit later, should there be something about integrating innovative changes? One of those goals talks about facilities and envisioning not just like long-term facilities needs, but the classroom of the future, our schools of the future. And given that there's so many changes in education, maybe there's something that needs to be included in the capital section on that.
I mean, we did item under one, not fail to address, we have the long-term vision for our public school facilities. We can include there a reference to the strategic plan if that's the relevant change.
Yeah, I can't be more articulate right now.
Okay.
But there needs to be a tie-in to that strategic plan, something about innovation, recognition that education is changing so quickly. What is a classroom in the future?
Well, that's what the issue of long-term vision for our public schools was intended to cover. But all wording changes can be submitted. Let's have deadlines of Monday for all of these items on the budget.
I had one other, and that was the identification of a major expenditure and the need of a major expenditure in the capital side. If you're going to put something in the current year that is the start of a major investment.
So we're talking about, we have multi-year programs being separately identified. But there may be some modification to address that concept too, but think about it and send it.
I'll get it by Monday. My other comment was for number 1 on the operating side, or I guess at the top, is it the board goals that were, was it June 7th, 2012? Are those the right board, is that the right date for the board goals?
That's when we adopted the academic goals, so it's, there are other dates that are wrong. Yeah, okay. I believe that's the date we adopted the 3 academic goals, reading, math, and writing. That was in last year's guidelines, we didn't change that. Other hands? Can't see hands. Peter?
I guess I had two things. I tried to read through the stuff we did in the ad hoc committee on the budget book and read the instructional letter to see if it matched. I didn't finish the exercise. I was thinking, Leslie, to your point, it might just be easier to write in here to say reference will implement all recommendations in the approved committee report when we accepted that. And it would be great if we could do that, because I know that will make young Benjamin go back and read that again just to make sure he's got all the items done. That would be my suggestion. The second thing that puzzled me a little bit is I don't understand maybe this is a separate subject, the capital plan. It's like we keep setting these 10-year capital plans, but it seems like we reset them every 2 years. So it doesn't seem to me to be much of a plan if we're constantly resetting it. Is there a reason we're talking about resetting the plan again?
The resets in reference to the facility studies that are going on this summer. We're doing 2 major ones, one on the exterior, and I'm answering for Ben, I'm sorry, but one on the exterior and one on the tagging program. But
didn't we just do one like 3 years ago by your predecessor? Not by your predecessor, but what was her name first? And then there was done one before you came by the big, tall Irish guy. What was his name?
Tony.
Tony. I'm just wondering, we can, what was it? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, sorry.
I forget the exact date of the last refresh of the facility assessment, but it is time to do another quick refresh of it. That's what we're attempting to do over the summer. We built into the capital budget. But the other major driver of why we constantly we get the impression that we're having to reset it almost every year because it's the correct impression. Because the way the last several years of the fiscal budgeting has occurred, we are forced to do a very short burst of adjustments to the proposed plan, and then that we, rather than reshuffle the entire plan, we shift the money to the year 2 of the plan, and then you have to now reshuffle that year 2 plan. And we've had 2 years of those activities, so it is very difficult to have a plan that we just sort of do minor tweaks to. We're actually, for the last 2 years on average,
because we're
pushed $2 million out to the following year.
Because we're short.
Because we're short for the current
fiscal year. Now that makes sense to me. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, so wording changes. I think there are concepts that Ben has the input of some of the concepts mentioned, but any other wording changes, if you submitted by Monday, that would be helpful. This will come back to us in 2 weeks. And the next item on the agenda, are we done yet? No. 2013-14 agenda plan. First look at next year's workload, which focuses a lot on achievement. Do you want to say anything or?
This is basically a reflection of the major reports that the board has either requested or traditionally gets. The Policy Governance Committee submitted the monitoring report schedule. The rest, the Improvement Planning Committee and Strategic Planning Committee representatives and Policy Governance Committee representatives looked at the improvement planning reports and suggested those. Special reports and budget reports are basically traditional. Now it's up for discussion.
Jennifer?
Is there any possibility without disruption to the administration's work schedule to take something from the far right column, which is the middle school report, and move it into this plan for the coming year?
I can address that, because I think when we talked about these reports when we were making out the schedule, we realized that it would take the 3 middle school principals to come together to develop a report. We had no framework for them, and now that we have a new middle school principal, we were hoping that we'd do the high school next year and the middle school the year after. That was the logic. It doesn't necessarily mean necessary.
The high school report isn't on here, I know there are.
Scheduled column.
That's your annual monitoring report on graduation requirements policy. That's not that's your standard report.
But I thought that graduation requirements, the whole, because when I wrote that up, I wrote it as the graduation report, and slash whatever, you can do the graduation requirements as part of that. But that was meant to be the report on the high school.
And there is very important, GHS and graduation.
I wanted to say one more thing about that. On the writing under special reports, you have new courses from the high school. I would hope, as we go through the monitoring reports, that we wouldn't be having a special session where a course comes out to us out of context.
Yeah, Irene and I have talked about that, so I think we do want to try and get ahead of that for next year, do a better job of that. I read our conversation correctly. Yes. We both recognize that it has to be different, at least from administration.
That makes sense. I know that the high school presents the new courses when they do, because they're trying to schedule them in time to be offered as courses when the students are signing up for them in the spring. So they have it printed and they have the course offerings available for the following year. That's why the timing is where it is. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be presented sooner.
Well, it also has to be
or
in the
another
budget
context.
too. It has to be before the budget to know how much you need to put in the budget for new courses.
A lot of the academic reports are still in the fall, so the timing might be okay, but we've eliminated a lot of the monitoring reports where we're getting new course requests we're like on an every other year schedule for things like art, and art always comes back to us with new course requests, so sometimes that might not be possible. But where possible, I think it does make sense. There was also a request, though, to hear about course offerings in the context of all the course offerings, which I guess could be incorporated into the high school report. But if the things that are on the right, in the right-hand column, the far right-hand column, even if they're not scheduled, are they part of, or potentially part of next year's reports, and we don't have to take the time over the next couple of weeks?
They can be scheduled however we want to schedule them. They can be scheduled later. They can be scheduled because it's your decision and you're telling us you want to see them then. It can be scheduled by administration saying it's time for us to, or we would like you to review this now.
So we can approve this in 2 weeks, just the way it is, and schedule later.
I always keep a column of to-be scheduled items.
For workload, isn't it better to try and plan in advance when we can?
We can.
Just not tonight.
No, not tonight. I think that forward your suggestions. I think it would be best to schedule things that we know that we want to schedule. These things in the right hand that we know we're going to talk about. We should try and schedule them. And then we should look for things that might be missing. Okay, that's the next. Moving on, Strategic Planning Committee update.
The committee began its work in March and met almost every Monday until May to develop a draft of, that we now give to the board for consideration. On the committee was Steve Anderson, Jennifer Dayton, Peter Von Braun, and John Curtin was representing the administration, and Leslie was an ex officio. The strategic plan serves as a roadmap. It represents the goals and major focus for the board and the administration for the next 5 years. The committee agreed to support 3 very broad goals that would position us for the future. The focus was on student achievement, staff performance, and fiduciary responsibility. And then the objectives then were the leverage points necessary to accomplish the goals. We placed the highest priority on student achievement, and so being college and career ready, which of course is a new way of measuring student achievement at the high school rather than just a head count at graduation. We also focused on staff development to make sure that every child had all the support they needed to achieve at their highest level. And the third one was to align all the resources, facilities, and in the budget in terms of supporting all areas that would lead to greater student achievement. Then the 3 themes that we worked with were innovation, technology, assessment, and communication. And those themes go throughout all of the objectives. And then the administration will then develop action plans to make sure we reach these goals. This next step, though, is to have input from the board tonight or whatever, and then pass it on to the administration for their input and comment, and then on to other stakeholders. So if anybody has any comments or suggestions.
I think given the late hour, we'll suggest that board members provide. Do you have comments? No, I was going to suggest that board members forward specific comments to Barbara as the committee chair, and she identified. Did you identify the next steps of how to move you forward? Go ahead.
I can do that.
Okay.
Our note taker can't hear us.
We're going to forward comments on what's been written. It's an update of where they are now. Their next steps is to work with the administration more formally on just reviewing the plan and determining overlap and where it makes sense and doesn't make sense, and then they'll come back and we have to discuss the next steps for how we decide to approve a strategic plan for the board. So the next item on the agenda is the action item on the 2012-13 agenda plan. I'm looking at the agenda plan. There are a couple things that I think are on here that do need to change. It says that we will have a report on the superintendent's evaluation at the next meeting. We will not. Oh, Mr. Bumrun, I see a hand.
Is this really the 2012-13?
Yes, this is our agenda for the next meeting. One more meeting.
Okay, just for the next meeting.
Yes. So the report on the superintendent's evaluation will not be at the next meeting. It will be in the fall. We are going to begin the superintendent performance evaluation, but we want the achievement data before we finalize the report. The strategic plan for our action items should come off because the committee is still working on it. The strategic roadmap should come off because that is not an item that we discussed tonight, and it's morphed into something else. We will be discussing the success system in the fall. The one item I couldn't remember, the administration resource plan for priorities, we talked about it May 23rd. Was that just discussion, or did we approve it that night? Anybody else remember? Well, if we approved it that night, it comes off. If we didn't, then it stays on. We'll check afterwards. But those are the changes I have for next week's meeting. The next meeting, the focus will be on our special project.
Isn't the strategic roadmap, going back to that, we're putting that somewhere at some time down the future?
down in the future, yes.
Okay.
But we are separating the success system. That's still going to be maintained as a document.
That's the one that's being scheduled
for the fall. Yes. Okay. With that, I think we're adjourning into an executive session. Very quick executive session. Thank you for attending.